تسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah, hope all of you are doing well. This is the first session of a few sessions on the topic of Dawah. Sorry about that. Of Dawah. And the first thing that we need to do is to put this aspect of our deen in context. One of the things that we'll see that will unfold, continue throughout these days, is what I feel to be a very important breakdown, which is at the very heart of Al-Maqasid, this organization that has been established and that we're attempting to revive the meanings of this religion, that in its entirety, holistically, by fostering and creating the environments for people to learn and to put that knowledge into practice, and then to be able to seek the fruits of that. And one of the very convenient breakdowns that we find, we mentioned it yesterday, and that will explain a certain aspect of it in more detail, is what you could call, as they've been named by my teachers who developed this name, Al-Maqasid Thalatha, the three objectives, if you will. There are three learning objectives, would probably be a more idiomatic translation. And that part of that is knowledge, ilm. And that we'll be going into more detail at a later point of what exactly that means, knowledge. That's one aspect of it. And that has different sciences that are associated with it, that has different classifications that are associated with it. But we'll save that topic for later. The second aspect of that is suluk, spiritual wayfaring. And that if you'll notice under the Al-Maqasid banner that we've titled it, the subtitles, knowledge, service, knowledge, devotion, and service. We've chosen the word devotion because I think that conveys the best of what we have, at least of the English words that I've come across, that the essence of what this is about. And that suluk is that it's broader than devotion. Devotion captures the main aspect of that, because it's not just about worship, but devotion in the broadest sense. About worship, but also that the essence of suluk, the spiritual wayfaring, which the next session of Shaykh Muhammad is going to be on that principles of spirituality, is that the essence of it is sidq tawajjuh, sincerely directing the heart to Allah Ta'ala. And that, in other words, devotion, devoting your heart to God. And that again, that has different dimensions and different classifications, that we will save that discussion as well for later. But then the third part of this triad, or this tripartite breakdown, is da'wah. And this is a word that has been used and abused and misused at times, and that, unfortunately, that sometimes it conjures up images, like other words when people hear them, that aren't according to the whole reason that these words have been used in the first place. Right? You'll see other words that are like that. These words like jihad, these words like sharia, these words that oftentimes conjure up images in people's minds, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, that are diverted from their very positive and encouraging meanings that are embedded in them. So that if we look at this word da'wah, is that it stems from a root word, da'a yad'u, which simply means to supplicate. Or it could also mean to call, da'a yad'u. And the verbal noun, which is that which turns it takes it from the state of a verb to the property of a noun, is to da'watan wa du'a'an. Da'watan wa du'a'an. So we all know du'a, we were speaking about that earlier. And that just as they're related linguistically, du'a and da'wah, that likewise is that they're related in meaning as well. And that in fact is that one of my teachers actually said about this, is that 80% of the reality of da'wah is dua. And the other 20% is da'wah, of actually going out and doing what one needs to do outward to be able to share their beliefs with others. And that's not normally the way that we think of it. So technically, if you're going to give that great statement, it's haq and it's right, as 80% of these sessions that we would be spending, we'd actually be spending on dua and the etiquettes of dua and the importance of dua. And then yallah, let's just get together, and what's probably the most beneficial thing of all, let's just all make dua together for the next few hours. And this is very real though, because this is the essence of the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ, is that in the battle of Badr, which Allah Ta'ala refers to in the Quran as the day of decisiveness, the Yawm al-Furqan, that the night before, that the Prophet ﷺ spent virtually the entire night in prayer making dua. And at the same time, he had revelation revealed to him earlier. The Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab said that when he, after the battle of Badr, he realizes that this was the meaning of that verse that was revealed to him earlier. And the Prophet went out to the battlefield and he said, كَأَنِّي أَنظُرُ إِلَى مَسَارِ الْقَوْمِ, as if that I am seeing the places where the dead bodies are going to lay from the battle. And that the narrator of this hadith says is that by God, is that where the Prophet pointed that people were going to fall dead, is that they didn't move from that place a handspan. Meaning the Prophet knew he was going to receive victory, that he even knew who was going to, he was given knowledge of who was even going to pass away in that battle. But despite that he spent the majority of the night before that, right, in prayer. And so this is the reality, and this is something that in terms of this, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set up His creation, and that there are means. There are means for things to happen. And one of the sunnah al-mahjura, one of the great sunnahs of our Prophet ﷺ, the aspects of his way that have been abandoned, is the sunnah of weeping before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the wee hours of the night. And that this is a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is one of his great sunnahs. And the true waratha, the true inheritors, take this very seriously. And that the teachers that I know firsthand, this is something that doesn't just happen once in a blue moon. This is something, is that their whole day is fixed, that their day revolves around that time that they spend in the night before their Lord. That this is at the essence of not only our relationship with Allah Ta'ala, but our relationship with His creation as well. And that why does Allah Ta'ala refer to, when He talks about the Ibad al-Rahman, when it comes to the individual aspect of the servant in their Lord, وَالَّذِينَ يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا, those who spend the night in the presence of their Lord, prostrating and standing in prayer. And that meaning that this is the essential aspect of our relationship with our Lord. And this is what Sayyidah Aisha said, was that after weeping, when being asked about what was the most amazing thing that she saw about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she wept and said, what wasn't amazing about him? Everything was amazing about him. And that all of us who are married, what would our own spouses say about us if they were asked about us? That many of them would be like, it would be the opposite, like, but this is living with someone day in and day out, and they didn't live in expansive dwellings like we live. The house of the Prophet ﷺ was minimal, that you could raise your hand, if you were 6 feet tall and raised your hand, you'd touch the roof, right? That he didn't even have room when Sayyidah Aisha was laying down in the chamber, except that he had to tap her legs in order for him to prostrate. That this was the way that he lived, to the bare minimum of what he needed to get by, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as part of his zuhud and his indifference to this world, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That anyhow is that the sunnah of dua and of buka and of ibtihal and of tadarru' and all of these beautiful meanings that we have of turning to Allah and imploring Allah, beseeching Allah, supplicating Allah. This is one of the greatest sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ. that relates to this topic of da'wah. This is the heart and this is the soul of everything. We're going to take a different tangent and get into some of the theory of it and get into some of the theoretical understandings, but this is at the heart of it. And without this component, we might as well stop here and not even go on anymore. Because this is supposed to, invoke and to affect you at a very deep level, such that becomes our own realities. And so that this is something that's there. And that bringing life to these type of sunan is one of the greatest things that we can do. And so that especially in these days, that if, as we're here together, is that all of us after prayer, that in tahajjud time, in the special times between the adhan and the iqamah, between the iqamah and prayer, that in sujood, that everyone make dua that Allah Ta'ala accepts us. And that Allah Ta'ala forgives us, and that Allah Ta'ala bestows mercy upon us. And we should have high himmah and have high spiritual aspiration. Is that we should have a high spiritual aspiration. That when we come together like this in these blessed times with so many blessed people, that inshaAllah that we attain great things. Because there's different things that you can attain in these type of gatherings and that in these type of retreats. And most often what you attain of the great things that you attain in these types of retreats are internal things that are not tangible to the eye. They're not perceivable to the senses. They're what are called khila' of taqwa, that literally clothings, draperies of taqwa. And that someone you never know, they might be in a state where they receive a nafha and a divine spiritual breeze, and if they're clothed with the garment of sincerity, or they're clothed with the garment of zuhud, or they're clothed with the garment of trust in Allah, or they're clothed with the garment of assigning one's affairs over to Allah, tafweed, and all of the various clothings of the heart that Allah Ta'ala points to and indicates in the Quran. وَلِبَاسَ التَّقْوَى ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. And the garment of taqwa, the clothing of taqwa, that is what is even better. And this is a clothing that when our clothes, when they get dirty, we remove them and we wash them. This is a garment that, just like the heart when it prostrates, it never comes up. When you're clothed with these internal realities of the deen, that it doesn't come off. And that we just did a series of classes in Trenton, New Jersey, looking at this is an amazing text. Everyone should read this text. The Risalat al-Mustarshideen of Imam al-Muhasibi. Imam al-Muhasibi was one of the earliest scholars who wrote on this science and articulated its realities. That he passed away, I believe it was in the year 243. This is a very standard, athari, if you will, understanding of the science of tasawwuf. It's rooted, everything's rooted in the Quran and the Sunnah. Imam Zayd so graciously has translated it into English with commentary, and that he translated as treatise for the seekers of guidance, or for the seekers of guidance. And it's an amazing text. But as we were finishing this text, it's so profound, and there's so many etiquettes, and the majority of which that, yes, they pertain to the outward, but the majority of them pertain to the inward. And this is the inheritance of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is the dawlah of the Prophet ﷺ. Masakin, miskin, poor people, they get caught up to think that they get so politically involved that we think that we're in need of a political entity for us to be able to experience the realities of this religion. No, it's all there. The dawlah of the Prophet ﷺ is these types of gatherings. Gatherings of dhikr, gatherings of remembrance, standing in prayer, making dua, learning his sunnah. That is the dawlah of the Prophet ﷺ. And that wherever it is. And wherever it can be, it is. And that there are profound implications that when people come together and when these meanings are mentioned, and that this is at the very heart of this affair. So if we take this back, because we went on this tangent in relation to the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ of dua, that the foundation of da'wah is dua. And that's, we're going to move on at this point, but I hope that we reiterate this time and time again, because that we need to be set up in an environment for ourselves to realize that reality on a regular basis. And that some of them have encouraged people to do this in congregation, and we'll be doing this in the last part of the night. And for those that find it difficult to attend both the classes and the Qiyam program, we wanted to have a blessing in this program. So Maulana Abdurrahman Ahmed, may Allah bless him, he agreed to he's doing 5 juz a day in tahajjud. And I don't just make the intention to attend, but it's going to be difficult for people to attend. I don't advise you to attend because then you won't be there for classes. But the point is we wanted to do a khatam of the Quran, a complete reading, so that when we close on Monday, that we'll close with the dua of the Quran, just so there's blessing involved. And inshallah, he'll do it on behalf of everyone else, and there'll be a few people with him. But I don't advise people to take part in that unless you want to just pray a few rak'ahs and go back to sleep. Otherwise you won't. The classes take precedence in that regard. But also that we'll be doing some of the other invocations, in particular that saying Ya Allah 100 to 200 times in congregation. And that again, that if you have strength, that's fine for you to attend. It's, if you find it difficult to attend classes, it's better just to wait till the adhan of Fajr and then attend. But the idea behind that is to benefit from everyone else's spiritual aspiration to help revive this sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ. And that reviving a sunnah of the Prophet is one of the greatest things that we can do, because every one of his sunnahs is great. And that were it not to be great, that why would the Prophet ﷺ have said, "Man ahya sunnati anda fasadi ummati falau ajr 50 shahida." That whoever brings life to my sunnah, a sunnah, that when my sunnah has become corrupted, is diverted, is that he will have the reward of 50 martyrs. And then the companions asked, "Minna aw minkum, minhum ya Rasulullah?" From us or from them, O Messenger of Allah? He said, "From you, because you find people to assist you in good and they don't find people to assist them." And then another narration that the Prophet said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in Al-Bayhaqi, "Man tamassaka bi sunnati anda fasadi ummati falau ajr 100 shaheed." Whoever adheres to my sunnah when that my ummah has become corrupted, is that they will have the reward of 100 martyrs. And the idea being is that the more difficult the time, that the more divine amnesty there is. That the more difficult the time, the easier it is for acceptance. And this is the blessing. We have a merciful Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala, alhamdulillah. And that this deen is yusr. This deen is a deen of ease. And that it doesn't negate us putting in effort. We have to put in effort. But in that this deen is a deen of ease, and that we should approach it as such. So, as for the other aspect, the 20% is what we're going to be speaking about now. This word da'wah is related to dua, but da'wah literally means in this sense an invitation. It's a call. So da'a yad'u also means to call. Okay, so that if you invite someone over to your house for dinner, da'awtuhu lil asha, I called him, invited him for dinner. Okay, or that you would also use it in the sense of to call someone, that I called them, so da'awtuhum. And in this sense is that this is the understanding of sharing this deen with others. This is a part of our religion. Whether we want it to be a part of our religion or we're embarrassed for it to be a part of our religion, this is a part of our religion. And that, you'd be surprised. I just met a man not too long ago in Detroit, Michigan. He's a white middle-class convert to Islam. His name's Dave. And it was just really interesting that he had met this, he had this Muslim friend doesn't matter their background, but anyways, that he had this Muslim friend for like 15 years. And that this person was interested in Islam for a long time, and that his friend was caught up. I mean, he wasn't practicing as he should, and that he used to tell him that he used to have to sneak out during lunchtime to eat food in his car during Ramadan and all these types of things. Anyhow, that he didn't want Dave to go to the masjid, because he was fearful that if Dave went to the masjid, he'd have a good experience, and then he would get back into his deen, and then he would be exposed. Because he's Muslim and he knows better, and if his boy Dave is practicing now, it's a problem. So he literally tried to prevent him. But then Dave said, why? There must be something in it. The fact that he's preventing me. So he goes to the masjid, and he knew the hadith that يعني من تقرب إلى الله يعني شبرا تقربت إليه ذراعا. He knew that hadith, that if you draw near to Allah a handspan, you'll draw near to Allah Ta'ala will draw near to you a cubit, an arm's length, and so forth. So he knew that hadith. He said, if I go to the masjid, I know I'm exerting energy, and Allah is going to provide me, open doors for me. So he goes to the mosque, and subhanAllah, he meets wonderful people who turns them on to other people, and the man converts. He just converted in just before Ramadan. I was just with him recently, and subhanAllah, that he converted to Islam. And one of the things that he was saying, which is why I mentioned this story, he's like, why aren't people sharing this faith? He's like, why aren't people sharing this faith? He said, here I have someone who was a Muslim trying to cover it up, and like, once I was exposed to this faith, right, why aren't they sharing it? Right? And this is the reality of Dawah, is that it's nothing other than being the reality of your deen. That Dawah is not some, mechanical way of presenting. Dawah is just you being you, who you are, believing in what you believe, practicing as you practice, having the character traits that you have, and being who you are. That's the essence of what the reality of this faith is. And that yes, at times that you share that, and yes, at times is that you convey what you believe. But the whole purpose of that is for the benefit of people. Is that there's high, noble objectives to it, and that it relates to a very subtle reality of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the human being, has created his creation. Is that there is no neutrality. There is no neutrality. Is that in every single moment, in the deepest metaphysical sense, you are either calling or you're being called. There is no neutrality. We were talking about entropy after Fajr today. That unless you are putting in actively energy to combat entropy of all different types, is that your state, socially, spiritually, or whatever else it might be, is going to lead to disarray. There is no neutrality. And so meaning that you're either asserting yourself, or you're either setting yourself up to be having something asserted to you. This is how it is. And even at the level of our own selves, is that, as Imam al-Shafi said, is that your own nafs, you either preoccupy yourself, you either preoccupy it good, or it will preoccupy you with other than good. So there is no neutrality. You have to consciously live and be who you are. And that, one of the things that I think is so important for us is that we live in a society that is not shy to spread. I mean, there's good aspects of our society, but I'm going to focus on some of the negative aspects. Oh, thank you, brother. That we live in a society that is not afraid to spread lewdness. I mean, don't look at all these things that are drawn on the bathroom stalls. I was going to, I'm not going to say, look, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. That much of the whole advertising industry, much of the way that people carry themselves, that it's always amazing to me how that we oftentimes, thank you, are hesitant to assert virtue when the people around us are not hesitant to assert vice. And that this is a real problem, because is that if you look at the different degrees, and this comes in the context of the end of times, is that our Prophet indicated to us is that in the end of time, is that people would leave amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar. Now, unfortunately, this is another thing. People have had horrible experiences in certain Muslim countries when they hear the concepts of amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar, that commanding the good and forbidding the evil. They have a horrible image come up to their mind because of a terrible experience they've had of a person that has been, as if mercy has been completely uprooted from their heart. This is a noble thing in and of itself. This is a positive concept, and even translating it as that, al-amr bil ma'ruf, commanding to good, maybe we should think of an alternative translation that conveys it idiomatically in a way that shows us as something positive. And it's not just mean people that think they're following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ being harsh on people. That's what people think of when they think of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, where that's not at the heart of this whole issue. Right? The heart of the whole issue is that even when you read, if someone would ever read the ahkam, the legal rulings associated with it, is that one of the foundational principles of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar is gentleness. Is that you're supposed to convey, if you can convey it gently, you have to. You cannot convey something harshly if you convey it gently. And that there's many other rulings that are associated with it. However, that this is something that we need to understand, is that we shouldn't feel that because of, oftentimes, with many people, the widespread moral depravity, is that we have to feel that if we're going to maintain uprightness, is that we have to hide that we should be able to contribute that according to the way that we view things. So, that having said that, this treatise that we're going to be looking at in Arabic, it's titled At-Tawali' As-Sa'diyah, that felicitous ascensions, and that it's an elucidation of the duties of the individual call. And this text was written by one of the students of one of my teachers, Sayyid Muhammad Abdurrahman al-Saqaf, who was based in Jeddah. And this is a very introductory treatise that tells us and prepares the way for us to understand that what is the reality of the way that we view the theory of this topic that we're going to call da'wah. And we'll just leave it at that. Sometimes is that it's better to leave these words untranslated, as that Muzaffar Iqbal, Dr. Iqbal mentions in the beginning of his journal, his recent journal, where he talks about the words, some of the words that they're better left untranslated, and how that this was part of that the way Islam spread to different countries. There are certain words that they became a part of the language, and that when you translate it, no matter how much you translate them, is that it doesn't convey the essence of it. So it's just part and parcel of it, that there are certain terms that it's better just to leave, let them become part of the language, and their understanding will be there. And that at the same time clarifying their realities. Okay? So that he's going to begin this by saying, in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Now we're in Appendix E. Praise be to God, who has made us the best community brought forth for mankind, enjoining good, forbidding evil, and believing in God. And may peace and blessings be upon our Master Muhammad, the mercy of God unto the world, the hold of absolute permission to convey on behalf of the real, transcendent and exalted be He. Allahu Akbar. He, majestic is He, said, O Prophet, indeed we have sent you as a witness, a bearer of glad tidings, as a warner, as one who invites unto God by His permission, as an illuminating lamp. That is the essence of everything that we're going to be discussing. Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu, inna arsalnaka shahidan wa mubashiran wa nadhira. That, O Prophet, we have sent you as a witness, a bearer of glad tidings, and a warner, and then what? وَدَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Not da'iyan calling to anything else, not calling to himself, not calling to this, not calling to that, not calling to the world, not calling to إِلَى اللَّهِ. The essence of this call that is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that if we reflect, we've all heard that verse, and we've heard that verse many times, but reflect upon the profundity of that. That this is the essence of religion. And that if anyone tries to tell you otherwise, or tries to steal this from you, that hold on to this tightly. The whole purpose of the Quran and the Prophet, and all of the targheeb and the tarheeb, and the encouragements and the warnings, and all the different themes of the Quran from beginning to end, and the sending of the messengers, and everything else that we have, وَدَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ. It's about arriving to the knowledge of Allah. That is the essence of everything. And all of the outward measures that we have, from the ahkam of the sharia, to the axioms of the sacred law, to the universals and everything else, is for this purpose. Everything should be leading to that. And it's one of the greatest pitfalls of people's approach to religion, is that they take the means as the end and they forget that what's it pointing to. Because you have to have wisdom, not only knowledge, to be able to understand how the outward relates to the inward and when to apply that outward in order to create a sense in the human being of what's important in terms of the goal that they're trying to attain. But not only da'in Allah, da'in ilallahi bi'idhnihi. Allahu Akbar. That is really profound. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given unconditional, absolute permission to Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to call to His presence. What's an example of this? That oftentimes when we talk in these types of terms, that it's a bit abstract. Like, what are you really trying to get at? Well, let's look at Haritha. What happened in the story of Haritha? That, Ya Rasulullah, that asbahtu mu'minan haqqa. The Prophet asked him, how are you doing this morning, Haritha? I've become a true believer. We've all heard the hadith. But what is he, like, yani, this to me is amazing. How someone, you know, how we don't think about these things. That he's saying he's attained true belief. Look at what you're saying, because every statement has a reality to back it up. What is the reality of what you're saying, O Haritha? And then he says, Ya Rasulullah, he says, كَأَنِّي أَنظُرْ إِلَى الْعَرْشِ اللَّهِ بَارِزًا. It's as if I am looking at the throne of God right before my eyes. What kind of human being is that? They're looking at the throne of God. كَأَنِّي. And that's very metaphysically deep. Ka, tashbih. You could go into great details on why the kashf of the awliya is what the kashf of tashbih, but the kashf of the prophets is not. The kashf of the prophets is qat'i, the kashf of the awliya is dhanni. But ka'anni, kahf tashbih, as if that I'm looking to the throne of God, bariza, right before my eyes. Azifat nafsi an dunya, that I've turned away from this world. Fastaw anni dhahabaha wa madraha, dirt and gold is the same to me. And as if I'm seeing the people in paradise receiving the pleasures of paradise and the people of hell seeking refuge from the torment of hell. What kind of human being was this that said this? And he was a young man, he was a teenager. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, Abdun, nawwar Allah qalbah. He didn't say, that's bid'ah or that's shirk, that no human being can see that or hear that. The Prophet said, that is a servant that Allah has illuminated his heart. That arafta falzam. You've known, in brackets, the way, what you're doing is right. The Prophet confirmed him, falzam, stick to what you're doing. Because you're doing it right, whatever it is that you're doing. And subhanAllah, what is that? Imran ibn Hussein used to hear the taslim of the malaika. And this is all from Allah Ta'ala's creation. That with da'in at Allah, these things are actually veils. These are veils. There's veils of darkness and there's veils of light. These are veils. We don't worship for these things to have these unveilings. These things are there to strengthen the Iman and faith, so we move up to a higher level of certainty. But the reality is that they're also to point to facts that there is such thing called an unveiling. You can know Allah. As abstract and difficult as that is to understand, is that you can know Allah. And that all you can do is point to that reality and talk about how beautiful it is, and to know there's some reality to it if it happens to you. And it could happen to any one of us at any moment, and any day. And this is why we always have to be in a state of taraqqab, where we're looking for these great nafahat of Allah Ta'ala, because you never know when it's going to come. There might be people who come to take part in this retreat that receive a ba'ath, this powerful urge that moves them and motivates them to make tawbah. And after making that tawbah, to have tahakkuk and to realize taqwa, and then to take a path then to attain the higher degrees of taqwa that relate to shuhud and the divine witnessing. And then once you understand that this is the whole purpose, وَدَّاعِينِ اللَّهِ بِإِذْنِهِ, how do you understand Amr bin Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar then? If you find people that are doing that are taking people out of the religion, something's wrong. Something's wrong. They're not understanding their deen. They've misunderstood the whole purpose of everything. Because one of the primary principles of that is that if you tell someone something and you feel it's going to push them farther away, it's haram for you to say something to them. If you think that it's going to lead to a greater munkar, you can't say anything. It's better to remain silent. That's one of the principles of that. And there's a number of others as well. But this is the whole point. This verse is so profound. وَدَاعِينَ اللَّهِ بِإِذْنِهِ وَسِرَاجًا مُنِيرًا. And a radiant lamp. And you could go on and on and on about this topic, about who the Prophet ﷺ was, who the Prophet ﷺ is, and who Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ will be. Because is that He is the one through whom which we draw near to Allah Ta'ala. Every inheritor of the Prophet, a scholar or a wali of Allah, only takes you to the presence of Sayyidina Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Is that he is the teacher of all of us. Is that even though that we weren't there, that when you learn the sunnah, and when you learn the sunnah from living examples who have embodied that sunnah, it is as if you are learning from the Prophet himself Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And that his teachings are what are going to draw you near to your Lord. That's what's going to remove the veil. And that's just why it's very important when these tendencies of legalism that we were discussing, whether it was this morning or last night, is that once you understand is that the whole point of the qalb, the outward form, is so that you could have the spirit blown into it. Not just for the sake of the outward form. The rules aren't there just for the rules. The rules are there for our benefit. And that once you start to find the beauty of the rules, and that if you can just confine your nafs to those rules and open up the door for the freedom of the ruh, the spirit, that's where true freedom is. The modern world has lied to you. Don't ever believe that you can attain freedom by following the caprice of your soul. That will encage you and enslave you and relegate you to the plenary realm, that you'll be like a beast. بَلْ هُمْ إِلَّا كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ إِنْهُمْ إِلَّا كَالْأَنْعَامِ بَلْ هُمْ أَضَلُّ سَبِيلًا صُمٌّ بُكْمٌ عُمْيٌ فَهُمْ لَا يَرْجِعُونَ. That deaf, dumb, and blind, and they will never return. That true freedom is freedom of exposing the realities of the ruh, which is what he's going to speak about now. Is that what are the essence of these prophetic teachings? It's coming. But to really drive this point home, this is what our Prophet came for. Is that he came to call us to Allah. And that fixate that in your heart, and to know that every individual teaching of Rasulullah is to call you to Allah. And if you approach the sunnah of the Prophet in that way, even when you read the ahadith that you might not understand, is that no, qat'an, 100% is from that standpoint only. Is that he's giving us advice so that we can attain these realities. And he's also saying, and peace be upon his pure household who are in union with the Quran until the day of coming, until the life pool, the hawd of the chosen Prophet, and upon his benevolent companions that expended their wealth, themselves, and their lives in hope of imperishable gain, and upon those that follow them in excellence until the day of judgment. May we be with them and amongst them through your mercy. Ameen. O the most merciful of those that bestow mercy, I ask God the Great to make us from them. Ameen. To proceed. Indeed, God created man in the best of forms, inwardly and outwardly. We're upright, walking beings with an opposable thumb, and internally that we have hearts that can know Allah. We've been created in the Ihsan taqweem, outwardly and inwardly. And he says, and made for him a body, a self, a heart, and a soul intertwined inside a tremendous physical mold, as Shaykh Jihad was saying earlier. Body, mind, and soul. The coloring of Allah, and whose coloring is better than Allah. Sibghatullah, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ مِنَ اللَّهِ sibgha. That He it is that we worship. This is the coloring of Allah, that He's molded all of these different aspects of us together such that we function as one entity, even though we have these apparently disparate parts, but we still function as one entity. This is amazing. And that the way that our hearts can become colored, and that each one of the dimensions of the human being has a food, that if you feed it, it grows strong. If you don't feed it, it becomes emaciated and weak. And how can we feed every aspect of the multidimensional nature of the human being? That even one aspect of the human being is multidimensional. What we did this morning, even though we only did the meditation for 1 minute, and tomorrow we're going to do it for 10 minutes, that was really amazing. The meanings that come to your heart when you really just stop thought and think for a minute and reflect. There's deep, powerful meanings that come. Knowledge is generated when you oftentimes stop thought, that you have inspiration that comes to you. And that's one aspect, is this aspect of tafakkur, of meditation, that needs to be fed. There's many other dimensions that when you feed them, and they have a specific food, that when you feed them, is that you will grow strong and you will be healthy. Then he says, then he made for him a way, an upright path for his worship. If he travels upon it, he is considered a pure servant, thereby ascending to the heights of the Illiyin. If, however, he shuns it, he thereby descends to the furthest abyss, becoming a comrade of the devils. Meaning is that the human potential is inextricably linked to their freedom of choice. The very fact that we can attain what we can attain relates to this taklif and this legal responsibility. So the potential of the human being is that in and of itself, that we can attain the greatest of goods. But at the same time, that the danger is that if someone doesn't uncover that the great potential that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed within them, is that we can also fall to the lowest of the low. So our condition is one of a very serious nature. And then he says here, that getting to the essence of the human being. Man, and when he says here man, we've said this before, he means here generically male and female. And it's not sexist, this is just English language. It's not being sexist. That this is just how we have to say, this is how we happen to say Ihsan in English. You say man. It just so happens it's the same word for the individual gender. Whereas in Arabic, that it doesn't, Ihsan is generic. It relates to both male and female. If you want to use gender-related language, you would say dhakar or untha, yani male or female. Anyhow, man holds the secret of the beneficent spirit. He, the Most High, said, and breathed of my spirit unto him. This is one of the meanings that came to my heart this morning. We were reflecting upon our own breath. Is it how that there's a relationship between our nafas and our breath in life. That without breath, that there is no life. And it's the sign that we're alive. And everything in reality that has a breath to it. And that just as our body is that motivated by the breaths that we take and the air that we bring in, and the way that that's processed, and then the way that and then the way that we're naturally pure, that we breathe in, and that we keep the good aspects of the oxygen, and then we emit, I always forget, is it carbon monoxide or dioxide? Whatever it is. Mono or dioxide? Thank you. That I always get those two confused. That we emit carbon dioxide. And that when we do that, it's the natural purification process that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, which is why it is so significant, is that this is the first human civilization in history that has destroyed the air and the quality of the air. No other civilization in human history ever destroyed the quality of the air. Ever. We're the first post-industrial revolution. This is the first civilization in a very short period of time, about 200 years, has destroyed the air in many places. That it's not even healthy to breathe when smog levels reach certain levels in places like Los Angeles and others. Anyhow, that Allah Ta'ala breathed, وَنَفَخْتُ, look at the language that is used, and breathed of my spirit unto him. Ruhi indicates the greatness of the ruh, of the spirit. And that meaning that every human being, are we out of time? What time do we have to end? 10 minutes. Every human being has in them the secret of the blowing of the ruh into them. Every human being, Muslim and non-Muslim, old and young, black and white, from the east or from the west, wherever someone is, every human being has in them the secret of the blowing of the ruh into them. And there's a relationship of this secret to the fitrah of the human being, the natural disposition of the human being. And there's a relationship between that secret of the blowing of the ruh and the fitrah and the natural disposition of the human being, and the interaction of the human being with everything around us. The environment, other people, and then ultimately with our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that, if you will, that the various ahkam and rulings of the sacred law that we've been given, and the beliefs that come along with that, in the way that it was explained earlier, that are all collectively a part of the sharia, the sacred law in the broadest sense, including both ethics and belief, is that it is quite precisely what aligns already with what we know. That it's not something foreign, external, that we have to change ourselves back to. That it is a part of us already. So in a sense, yes, that we are coming back in tune with that. But in another sense, is that it's already there to begin with, as the default position for every human being. So in other words, is that the prophetic teachings are only withdrawing and evoking from us what already exists within us. It's already there. It's just there to move it out and to cause it to stir up and to come to the surface. Just as that you have tea that has in it sugar, if you don't stir the tea, is that you don't taste the sweetness of the sugar. It's already in the tea. And if you just merely stir it, halas, then the sugar mixes with the tea and it tastes sweet. Every human being has that potential within them. And it relates to the fitrah, and it relates to the breathing of the spirit the breathing of the spirit into the human being. He therefore, in accordance with his natural primordial state, inclines towards his origin, which is in essence spiritual. So the foundation and the most important aspect of the human being is the ruh. And the homeland of the ruh is the divine presence. Every single human being's soul is longing from the pains of separation to its origin, which is in the divine presence. Every human soul. Every human soul. Whether people realize it, whether they don't realize it, whether they reject it, whether they accept it, whether they cover it up or they uncover it, every soul is longing for the divine presence, because every soul was in the divine presence. But the residue of devilish whispers, self-appetite, the world apparent in the company of heedless folk and ignorance, veils the soul from its world and severs it from its creator. Connection and proximity to whom, majestic be he, is the cause of every type of felicity. So as we come into this world, that there's a reality in terms of our psychological profile to genetics. There's a reality in terms of being socialized and being raised in a certain way. There's a reality of how inner speech and the decision-making process of the human being affects that who we are in our overall terms of who our being. But the whole point of all this, despite all of that, for this reason God sent his messenger prophets to remove these veils from man and to awaken their sleeping hearts and their confused minds by reminding them and arousing the primordial faith that is concealed inside them. And this is why, is that if you have the teachings of the prophets, that in particular the prophet of our time, Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, presented to you clearly in a way that you can understand, and the bridge of understanding is created such that people are speaking to you in terms of what you deem to be important. And every person will find that in the sunnah and the way of the Prophet ﷺ, is that these teachings will be irresistible, because is that they will remove you from this state of disconnect back to a state of being connected. This is the path of the prophets and the callers unto God. He the Most High says, therefore I remind, and this is why Allah Ta'ala says remind as opposed to just tell. We already know. We just need reminders. Yes, also in the outward sense is that you're told something you forget, and as years pass that you're reminded, but also in the deepest sense is that we already know. We know, your soul knows reality. It's all there under the surface. You just need to be reminded of that reality. Therefore remind for reminding prophets, the believers, he the Most High says, for you are but a reminder, you have no authority over them. The Prophet ﷺ didn't come to force anyone to do anything. La akhira fi deen, that there's no compulsion in religion. And there's a particular understanding of that verse, yes. Because there are penal punishments that relate to the Islamic State for particular reasons. But aside from that, in general, in relation to forcing other people, there's no akhira fi deen. There's no compulsion in religion. The Prophet came to convey the message. He came to convey this message, and here it is. And this is why that one of the beautiful statements of Shaykh Nuh Keller, and he has an article, if you want to Google it, it's worth reading. I think it's important. Islam is not a cereal. And one of the things he says in this article is that the truth doesn't need to be changed. The truth is the truth. That if you try to maneuver around the truth to explain things in a way that divert from the truth, you're actually doing yourself and others a disservice. The truth is not in need of, it's not in need of adherence to the truth. People are in need of adhering to the truth. And this is why that the foundational message of the prophets is a message of just conveying what their Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala has informed them. We'll just read through this and stop there. Verily God sealed messengership with His beloved Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and made him a bearer of glad tidings and a warner for the entire creation, assisting him with an absolutely perfect way that is appropriate for every time and place, and prepared for this way all necessary means for its continuity, dissemination, establishment. From the greatest means that the beloved brought is that He infused into the hearts of His followers concern for calling unto God. And He thrust upon the shoulders of every Muslim responsibility for holding deep concern for the affair of his community. He said, whoever does not show concern for the affair of the Muslims is not from them. God, transcendent and sublime as He, has made the hearts of His servants crave the establishment of this affair, and that He considers those that call unto Him in adherence to His beloved Muhammad, casting such people into the prophetic sphere, thereby attaining union in the two abodes. He, the Most High, says, say, this is my path. I call to Allah clear-sightedly, I and those who follow me, transcendent as God, and I am not among those that associate others with Him. And that the greatness of this is that this is the way of the Prophet. Ana wa man ittaba'ani. Is that this is the greatest way to have this true ma'iyah and witness of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the prophets that came before, is by following in their footsteps, particularly in this regard. Then for the benefit of those that desire to establish His message from the latter generations, the beloved illustrated the best and most perfect principles and methods for calling and dealing correct with creation. He, the Most High, says, in the messenger of God you have a good example for him who hopes in God in the last day and remembers God much. In this small and humble work I will make mention of that which I have understood from those methods, and I will also mention the individual call, which is an aspect of this mighty mission. I have arranged this tract into chapters. I ask God for it to be of benefit to all those that study it. Ameen, O God, Ameen. And that so we'll stop there, inshallah. Q&A? Do we have time for Q&A? 1 minute? Is there any quick questions?
One of the things you mentioned is that you're not asserting yourself, you're being asserted upon. So do you have any recommendations for creating sort of the ability to be kind of upward moving? So for example, like your barrage with media, advertising, social media, content. So when we go back home from the street, how do we create these sorts of...
So the question is about asserting ourselves as opposed to having others assert whatever they're upon unto us, and that the barrage of the media and so forth. I think it's twofold. There's the long-term solution to that, and then there's the short-term. The long-term solution of that is going to take a lot of serious hard work and training and investment and establishment of institutions where we really take this thing seriously, where we come to understand the intricacies of the Western world in which we all live, and how we can present the realities of our deen to the context that we're in. And that is not something that is easy. That is a long-term project. It is going to require a lot of research and a lot of investigation. And that, you know, there's a really important book that I think that for this topic, if those want to read it, that they should, called Don't Think of an Elephant by George Lakoff. And that he goes into great detail about that in the dichotomy of the conservative, liberal dichotomy in U.S. politics. And he talks about how much the conservatives have invested in the institutions and think tanks in the upcoming generation as opposed to the progressives. And that meaning that is a long-term project of really learning how to frame how we're going to present the eternal realities of this religion in our particular time. And what is the choice of words that we're going to use, and that what is the way that we are going to translate certain terms, and so forth and so on. As for the short-term, solution, is that it relates to you in and of yourself. And I had this really interesting experience. Two of the worst experiences I've ever had is my wife here. We're in Virginia. No offense, Fatima, if you're here. that I was at Tyson's Corner. Don't ask me what I was doing there. I was dragged there by my wife. Actually, that's not true, but it was Eid. And I was standing there by the railing. My wife went into a store, and this lady, she was probably in her early 50s. Yes, she was white, like you would expect. And I was standing there, and I was wearing kind of like the Turkish jubba that I wear, and a longer shirt and baggy pants. And she walks by me, and she starts looking at me. And at first, she was looking at me in a way I was like, what is, and then she kind of goes like this, like as she walks by me, like looks me up and looks me down, and does it a second time, looks me up and looks me down, and she goes, ah, and just like keeps walking. And it was just, it was like, I was so shocked, because like it was, at first it was so bold that I didn't think she was actually, anyhow, that she walked by me and looked me up and down twice, just complete disgust. She's like, ah, and just walked by me. And, there's people that are like that they're just hypersensitive to, in Tyson's Corner, it's amazing. In Tyson's Corner, there's so many Muslims. They go, why do you see Muslims at malls? Right? That's it reminds them of Abu Dhabi and Dubai and Riyadh or wherever else they're from. But it's unfortunate. If you want to see Muslims, just go to like the nice malls, and you see Muslims all over the place. We should be seeing them in like good places, and anyways, I don't know why I mentioned that story. What were we talking about? The short-term solution is that time's up. Khalas. Be who you are, and I think that there's a tendency for us to seek validation, and we're going to get into this, by other than the way that we're supposed to receive validation in relation to our deen. And that once you understand that intellectually you don't let yourself get subjugated to that, and that you tap into our resources on how to self-define ourselves, that theoretically through knowledge, but most importantly, deeply from within. And one of the greatest ways to learn how to self-define ourselves is what we're doing in the morning, the practical aspect of learning how to think properly and meditate and reflect. That's an important aspect of it. Learning how to make dhikr properly, which is what we're going to do now, and so forth and so on. Is that learning how to self-define ourselves and what is the goal of this religion. And once that becomes a part of you, is that your being in and of itself will break through all those dichotomies. And that takes the own environment to be able to nurture that from within this. And that's something that we can all do, is being conscious of that. Of, in short terms, that being deeply in touch of our spiritual potential, that as Muslims, and that tapping into the sweetness of faith that comes with that. And then secondly, is that it's important for us to know our time as well, and to be able to theoretically break through a lot of these traps that are trying to make us feel validated by the quote-unquote other. And that if you live in that well, even if you can't affect others or clarify these realities to others on news channels, you'll be fine in and of yourself. And then, but slowly in the long term, then we also have to. But having said all of that, is that the greatest way to break through all of that is salawat and salams ala Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What's going to bring people to Islam in this country is when they start to experience the beauty of the teachings of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That if people are exposed to the beauty of the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and what they can attain by experiencing those beauties that come along with it, it will be totally, irresistible, and so that's a shortcut, but it doesn't negate either the outward aspect of the long-term khayr. Inshallah. Let's stop here, and then we have Shaykh Muhammad's session. Jazakumullah khair. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Bismillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa afdalus salatu wa atammu taslim ala Sayyidina wa Mawlana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam ajma'in. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Wa la hawla wa la quwwata illa billahi al-'aliyyil 'azim. Alhamdulillah. that we're moving along. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that give us, inshaAllah ta'ala, sustenance from His presence. And as is the nature of any type of intensive program, is that we wax and we wane, just like the moon. Is that we ebb and we flow. And we have times where we have energy and we have times where we're exhausted. But inshaAllah ta'ala, that if we turn to our Lord and ask Him to endow in us a special energy for this sake of iqbal and setting out on a path to Him and learning the affairs of His deen, inshaAllah ta'ala, that He can give us that which He normally doesn't give us in other times. And that if we have blessing in our time and blessing in our sleep, that we'll find that a little goes a long ways. And this is something that you find that when you're in special places, and if anyone who has gone to the Muslim world, there's a much more perceivable blessing in the time in the Muslim world in general. And that I remember that very clearly, that going to Mauritania and that going to sleep sometime after Fajr, and then that waking up and thinking that it's well into Dhuhr. After getting the full complete rest, it's well into Dhuhr. And then looking at the clock, it was like 10 o'clock in the morning. Subhanallah. Going back to sleep like, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. I missed Dhuhr, it must be Asr. And it's, still Dhuhr hasn't come in yet. And then a third time, I fell back asleep again. And subhanallah, you would think that it would almost be Maghrib, and it's just now Dhuhr, entered time to pray Dhuhr. It's a perceivable blessing in the time. And this is the case, is that there's two different types of food. There's the normal food, which oftentimes the way that we eat, the food that we eat, and the quality of the type of food we eat, all affects our health and it affects our sleep patterns. But also, that there's another type of food that also nourishes our soul, which then in turn that gives us energy, and that this is the food of the soul, which comes through dhikr and the remembrance of Allah wa ta'ala. And that quite literally, the more remembrance that we make is that the more energy physically we will even have. And that then there's something even beyond both of those things, is that if someone can move to the level of wilaya, where Allah Ta'ala has taken over their affairs, that you can just ask Sayyid Tarif at the back of the room about his teacher, and I consider him my teacher. We studied a text with him, the Sharh al-Mandumat al-Zamzami, the Shaykh Samar Nas, and that his regular routine, most of the days of his year, day in and day out, which maybe he gets 2 hours of sleep at night, if that, and that tahajjud and fajr prayer, and then teaching, and then at his clinic, and then at the Ma'had al-Fath, and then after this coming home, and then between Maghrib and Isha other classes, and then different majalis at night, and then la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, and that day in and then day out. And this is something consistent. This is the same way that I saw Murabat al-Hajj in Mauritania. This is the same way that, having traveled with Habib Omar, that you wonder how on earth do they not get sick. You try to emulate them 2 days, you'll get worn out, you'll be sick, you'll be finished, you'll be in bed for 4 or 5 days recovering, because your immune system won't be able to take it. And that I've literally seen him where he's gone on a consecutive travels for 3.5, close to 4 months, and every day, day in, day out. And there's certain things they never leave. That one time, that there's a brother here, Abdul Qadir Wiswal, that he had wanted Habib Omar to come to his house during the trip when he was visiting in 2011. And I was like, marhaban, we'll do everything we can, we'll see what we can do. And we had a program in Virginia, we were in Northern Virginia, and then we went to, we had a program, we did something in Baltimore, and then we ended up somewhere outside of Baltimore, I don't know where we were. And then it got late, it was like 11 o'clock when we left the house, and we had to go to New Haven, because we had a program at Yale at like 8:30 in the morning, or something like that. It was early in the morning, 9. And we couldn't cancel that program. And that we left the house that we were in, and we, mashallah, had this, it was one of those moments where we had this, they brought us like this really nice car to transport him. Maybe someone gave it iron or something, because the car, we're driving for 10 minutes, the car breaks down. this really beautiful, looks like brand new Cadillac Escalade breaks down on the side of the road. And we're like, La hawla wa la quwwata billah. It was raining, and that we know we have to go now several hours. We're already going to arrive in the middle of the night, and we hadn't even prayed Salat al-Isha. And mashallah, Habib Umar was totally calm. Nothing, hadi, yani, it is what it is. The people that are with Allah don't react the way that we normally react, us getting all nervous and anxious. And then, so we were trying to figure out what we were going to do. And does anyone live here anywhere close? And Abdul Qadir said, I don't live that far. Because we needed to pray Salat al-Isha, and we waited for our car to come, so then we figured that we were going to go to Abdul Qadir's house in Trenton, New Jersey. And that he had a strong intention. Subhanallah, he had wanted us, and he had called home earlier because they were preparing food and so forth. And that he called them earlier and said, there's no way, we're not coming. There's no way. But then this car breaks down, and all of a sudden, next thing we know, we're en route to Trenton. And that we arrived there, and it turns out that I think his blessed spouse and his daughter both had dreams of Habib Umar, that coming into Trenton and standing outside this tree that's right outside their front door, and they had biryani and a whole table spread of food ready. So that at like midnight, he calls home and says, we're on the way, we're coming. And that even though hours before he said that there was no possible way, so we arrived at like 2 o'clock in the morning, had this beautiful table spread of food, and subhanallah, that we ate and prayed Salat al-Isha and then head out to New Haven. We arrived in New Haven at Fajr time, and that there's been almost no sleep. We were traveling the whole night. And that the gathering that we were supposed to meet we were supposed to be there at like 8:30 or 9. And so now it's like 5 o'clock in the morning that we prayed Salat al-Fajr, and then that people that have high spiritual aspirations, like this Habib Umar, he refuses to sleep after Fajr. It's makruh to sleep after Fajr. He won't sleep after Fajr. Even not sleeping all night long. Just staying up all the way until Ishraq, until sunrise. And then probably not going to sleep until around 6:30. And then we have to be out the door, right, by whatever, 8:30 or whatever. And subhanAllah. But it's one thing to do that once and then go back and make up for it and sleep 10 hours the next day. That every day is like that. Virtually. Every day is like that. Every day is like that. Every day is like that. And but the point is that for people like this, Allah Ta'ala endows them with a special gift of medit, of spiritual sustenance that translates into physical sustenance, which is, it really is in a sense a sign of wilayah. But yani Allah, we ask Allah Ta'ala to, give us strength, and I don't know their secrets. Even if we knew their secrets, they wouldn't be the same if we tried to do their secrets. But yani mashallah, just seeing people like this, these are the true people of Islam, alhamdulillah. So yesterday that we were covering some of the basics of Dawah, and that we were saying that unapologetically and unashamedly is that this is quite simply a part of our deen, is that we're required to share our deen, that we are a faith of propagation, period, and that we should constantly be thinking as believers how we can share this faith with others in ways that are non-confrontational, in ways that are meaningful, in the ways that are truly beneficial. And that, I wouldn't necessarily rule out even the knocking door to door, though, in the way that Jehovah's Witnesses do or anything like that. But it's not restricted to that. I wouldn't rule out people standing on the street holding up signs. There's a lot of people that get guided like that. SubhanAllah. Is that necessarily everyone's choice way of giving da'wah? No. However, I think that it is really important for us to think in a very concerted, calculated, strategic way. Is it how we can present this deen to our people? And one of the preconditions is precisely that, is that we have to see these people as our people. The fact that we're here in the United States of America and we're amongst these people, we have to see them as our people. Across the board, whatever their ethnicity might be, whatever their social class might be, we have to see them as our people. And the proof of that is that our Prophet ﷺ, in the Battle of Uhud, that we all know, when he said his famous statement, and keep in mind this is war, and they just killed about 70 of the companions, and they were asking the Prophet to make dua against them, and what did he say? Allahumma ihdi qawmi. Oh Allah, guide my people. He didn't say Allahumma ihdi ha'ula al-kuffar. Guide these disbelievers. And most of them, they were the ones who were fighting against them were kuffar. But he said qawmi فَإِنَّهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ, because they don't know. He's making excuses for them while they're at war with him. And he called them his people. So even while they're at war with him, that he was still calling them his people. So as terrible as many of these Islamophobes are, and as intolerant and vehement their attack on Islam, that we have to see people here as our people. Another proof in the Quran, the people of Ad, who the people of Ad that sent to them was the Prophet Hud alayhi salam. What does Allah Ta'ala say? وَإِلَىٰ عَادٍ أَخَاهُمْ هُودًا. And to the people of Ad, their brother Hud. Most of Ad disbelieved in Hud. But Allah Ta'ala says, their brother. Right? And this is their brother in humanity. And even though the specific application of the hadith, that none of you truly believe until he wants for his brother that which he wants for himself, applies specifically and most importantly to our brothers in faith. It also applies that, according to Imam Manawi and other scholars, to all of humanity, your brothers and sisters in humanity, wanting good for them. And that there's a big difference between letting the kufr of the kafir seep into your heart, and that's where sternness comes in. Is that we have izzah about our Islam. Is that we protect our heart. We create a fortress around the heart. We never let the kufr of the kafir in any dimension, whether it be in belief, practice, or ethics, seep into our heart. That we have everything that we need. Were we to be on an island and all we have is the Quran and the Sunnah, and we don't know anything else about any other thing in the world, we have everything that we need and more. It doesn't negate all these other knowledges that we've been talking about and the way to understand them theologically and their benefits and using them for the sake of the religion and so forth. But we also keep in mind is that we know how to self-define ourselves in such that we have everything that we need. And this is why Imam Ghazali talks about a knowledge, is that were you to be deaf, dumb, and blind and have all your limbs cut off, is that there's a type of knowledge that will still exist, that can still increase and that you could still acquire. That even were you not to have any of these things. And this relates to our true identity, if we're going to borrow this term identity, is that were we to imagine ourselves that having a different color skin, would that change our identity? Were we to imagine ourselves having all of our limbs cut off, would that change our identity? Were we to imagine ourselves, qadarullah, getting burns on half of our body, would that change our identity? Maybe in the eyes of people, what they thought of us. But if any of these things would change the way that anyone feels towards us, it's a sign that the love is not truly, fully, totally for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. That our true identity relates to something much, much, much deeper that can never be changed. And that's the thing, is that people can do all kinds of things outwardly to you, but in the end, that they can't change that essential aspect of you. And this is why one of the scholars, when he was about to be put in prison, that he said, is that being put in prison is khalwa. It's like being in a state of solitude. And if they kill me, it's shahada, it's martyrdom. And if they exile me, it's siyaha. I'll roam in the remembrance of God and reflect upon His creation. Right? Meaning whatever it is that they do to you, that they can only do it to the extent that we allow other people to do it to us. So that is in touch with our essential identity, which is not related to any of these other aspects. And identity is a strange, questionable thing anyway. That it's not associated with any of these other things that define people's over spans of time. There's something much deeper, which relates to the sir al-nafkha, which was what was talked about yesterday. The secret of the blowing of the ruh into the human being. And that the secret of this ruh being in the human being is that this is why, is that you naturally feel a deep sense of familiarity and love with people that you might not have ever known before. But you meet them and all of a sudden you feel that deep connection. There's a secret there. Sayyidina Ali bin Abi Talib used to say, and we've been talking these days about knowledge of unveiling and the possibility of unveiling. Sayyidina Ali used to say that on the day of Alastu bi Rabbikum, I knew who was on my right and I knew who was on my left. That definitely as the souls were in the presence of God, is that this is a possible knowledge. This is something that happened. And if Allah wanted to explain and disclose to you who was on your right and who was on your left, that He can do what He wants to do, subhanahu wa ta'ala. That عَالِمُ الْغَيْبِ وَالشَّهَادَةِ فَلَا يُظْهِرُ غَيْبُهُ عَلَى أَحَدٍ إِلَّا مَنْ ارْتَضَى مِنْ رَسُولٍ. That He's the knower of the seen and the unseen in the seen realm. And He does not manifest what is in the unseen, that except. So meaning the foundation is that the ghayb al-mutlaq, absolute knowledge of the unseen, is to Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. But He manifests knowledge of the unseen, illa, except man irtada min rasul, who He has chosen from a messenger. And then from the bab of wiratha, and then through inheritance, that could reach an inheritor of the Prophet Muhammad or any of the other prophets, alayhi salatu wassalam. So the crux of the initial discussion is that our Prophet ﷺ was da'iyan ila Allahi bi-idhnihi. And that should really move our hearts if you think about the profundity of that. He called to Allah through His permission. What kind of human being was this that was given permission to take people by their hand to God and to have them know God? The greatness of the Sahaba was in the fact that no human beings collectively in that way, that many people and that concentrated of a time, place and space had ever known their Lord before like that in human history. That was the greatest aspect of the Sahaba. That is the essence of this inheritance of the Prophet ﷺ that will never change. And that this is something that, even though we've heard these beautiful descriptions of how to understand our time and the nature of our times and the nationalistic tendencies of Muslims and the modernist tendencies of Muslims and the secularist and communist and socialist tendencies of Muslims and the way that this has warped people's understanding of the deen, and on and on and on and on, is that this is something that will always remain. Is that is still there. Is that the number of people that have arrived to the knowledge of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala from the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ is more than any other prophet in human history. And that is the greatest aspect of their wiratha, of their inheritance, the greatest aspect of being a follower of the Prophet ﷺ. And then there's open doors in that in a very deep metaphysical, if you will, sense of these doors of ma'rifah. One of the Salihin said, and again, you have to excuse me, I have a tendency now to say things I probably shouldn't be saying. But one of the Salihin said that خُدْتُ بَحْرًا وَقَفَ الْأَنْبِيَاءُ بِسَاحِلِهِ. I traversed an ocean, the Prophet stood at its shores. Astaghfirullah. That Imam Sha'rani has a book, Ta'wil al-Shath. He has a book where he gives explanations of these quote-unquote ecstatic utterances of some of the great saints. Because when they go through powerful states, they sometimes say things. And this is what Shaykh Jihad was speaking about yesterday in the Q&A session, was the importance of husn al-dhan, of having a good opinion. Because we have a hadith in Sahih Muslim about the man who loses his camel while he's sleeping under a tree, wakes up, sees his camel's gone, goes back to sleep, waiting to die, wakes back up and his camel miraculously is back. He sees the camel, he's so happy, he says, Ya Rab, that Anta Abdi wa ana Rabbuk. That he says that, oh Lord, you are my servant, you are my slave, and I am your Lord. Akhta'a min shiddat al-farah, the hadith says. That he made a mistake because he was so happy. If someone said that normally and they meant that, that's kufr, a'udhu billah, to say that to Allah. But because of his state of shiddat al-farah, that he made a mistake. Meaning that he wasn't in his right mind when he said it because he was so happy. If that's with your worldly life, what about if you're experiencing liman khafa maqam rabbi jannatan? That the one who fears the station of the Lord, there's two paradises. the paradise of the next world and the paradisical states of those who experience it in this world. If someone is experiencing that, they might say something that they don't know what they're saying because of the overwhelming nature of that state. And this is why the husn al-dhan is so important. But two, making ta'wil, what could it possibly mean? As for this statement, is that Imam al-Sha'rani says, is that هذا على حقيقته. That is a true meaning, he says. Why? And he went on to explain. He says, is that what this scholar meant was the Bahr was the Quran. And he said that because I am a follower of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and I've been given access to the knowledge of the Quran, which is muhaymin, it is a summation of all of the previous books, I have access through the Quran to knowledge that the previous prophets didn't have access to. And there's nothing against the law in that understanding. Because of Sayyidina Muhammad ﷺ, that we have access to knowledge in the Quran that even previous prophets didn't have access to. Because they had books. Yes, some of the prophets that came before us were given books. But from the blessing of the Quran, we have access to knowledge even that previous prophets didn't have. Now, it doesn't mean that someone is better than a prophet if they have a knowledge that the other prophet doesn't have. And we learn that in the story of Khidr and Musa alayhi salam. That Khidr, there's a difference of opinion whether he was a prophet or whether he was a righteous man. And in the story of Moses and Khidr that we learn is that Khidr had knowledge that Moses didn't have. Right? That's why Allah Ta'ala sent him to him. And that we understand in that you can have that individual Khidr who without doubt Moses is better in the sight of Allah Ta'ala, but Khidr can have more knowledge than Moses even though Moses is better overall. Likewise, that you can have individual members of the Prophet's ummah through ittiba and following the Prophet have access to knowledge that even prophets didn't have access to that came before. And at the same time recognize that no one will ever reach the level of a companion, let alone the level of a prophet. These are the ways that we navigate these types of issues. And that when you explain them, they make perfect sense. And there's la ishkal, wa la ghubar. There's no problem and it's not a big deal. So the essence of this was that verse, and then understanding the importance of the ruh and how the whole purpose of the prophetic teachings was to bring out of the human being their Adamic potential. And that is our job with everyone. Is it how can we help our own selves? How can we help those who are around us, our children? How can we all collectively work together to bring about our potential and who we can be? Every single person in this room has the potential of becoming one of the elect of the awliya of our time. Every single person in this room. That someone might walk out that door and receive an opening that were we to worship Allah Ta'ala for 70 years that we might not ever receive. Allah Ta'ala knows best. And that the closest people to that type of opening are the people that have certain traits of heart, in particular states of deep humility and brokenness before Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, and do things that no one else knows that they even do. Like clean the latrines at night so when their brothers wake up that they have clean latrines to use the bathroom in. That's the type of things that people like Imam Zayd Shakir do. I've heard someone firsthand tell me when they were staying in an apartment with him, I don't know, I believe they were in Jordan, and that the brothers told me they were all exhausted, they went to sleep. Someone woke up unexpected and he goes, and the bathroom was clogged, and there Imam Zayd is, that cleaning out the bathroom and scrubbing the bathroom. Allahu Akbar. That's Imam Zayd. Imam Zayd, just ask Shaykh Jihad about Imam Zayd. That we could talk all day long. Imam Zayd is an Imam. We're blessed to even know this individual. People have no idea who Imam Zayd is. And that people that, especially that come from the Bay Area, that they've missed the mark on Imam Zayd. As great as they think he is, there's something else about Imam Zayd that they're missing. Imam Zayd is one of the most special people that we have in our communities. Habib Ali Jeffrey told me, he said, if all you would do is write the name of Imam Zayd on a piece of paper and just pass it around to people, he said it would be of great benefit. Yani. But these are the types of things, these are the type of things Imam Zayd does. And the things that he does as well that no one else knows about. While they were on their fundraising campaign, he fasted every single day while they're trying to acquire their building. Now, he's going to be very unhappy. This is being filmed if it gets out. But he does a lot of other things that no one else knows. Though that's what it takes. This is not easy to tread this path. Is that that as they have said, that no one will attain in this affair except those who yukannisun al-mazabir bi arwahihi. Is that the people that literally it means clean, right, dumpsters with their souls, right? And there's two ways of understanding it: that clean out the dumpster that's in your soul, but also that see yourself as that is the greatest honor of all, is to be someone who's in some type of state of service, and that you don't have any istiqbal. If someone tell you to clean the latrines, who do you think I am? I should be da-da-da, or I should be da-da-da. Right? That's a great honor. And it's actually a really good thing to do. And as crazy as that sounds, what did you learn at the retreat? I learned to clean latrines. Right? People of dunya would think that's crazy. People of akhira would celebrate. Because that's the type of thing that these people do. And that they do things that no one else knows about. And that those type of people that do those type of things, is that they might say the exact same thing as someone else does. Which for someone else it's just empty rhetoric. But this person who says it with a qalb, a heart that is alive, has a vast impact. There's a story about that of one of the Habab, I believe Sahabi Abdul Muslim Tahir. He was invited to a majlis, a gathering in Mecca al-Mukarrama when these scholars were gathering together. And that different scholars were speaking, and many of them were speaking in very beautiful ways, and that speaking with rhetoric and beautiful Arabic and flowery language, and that people were impacted. But he gets up and he just raises his hand. He says, Allahumma ihdina fi man hadayt, wa afina fi man afayt, wa tawaffana fi man tawallayt, wa tawaffana fi man tawallana fi man tawallayt. And he said the dua of qunut of the Shafi'iyah that the Prophet ﷺ taught his grandson Sayyidina Hassan. And everyone starts weeping in the majlis. He made dua and everyone starts weeping. What was it about the heart of that individual? That Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani, they say that one of his sons, that he used to have such a powerful majlis that people would be very, very impacted by his majlis. And that his son, it came to his heart like, the words of my father actually seem very simple. I can do this. And he was a very eloquent speaker. So one day Shaykh Abdul Qadir had his son speak, and that he started to speak with very eloquent and beautiful words, and there was virtually no impact on the people. As eloquent as he was, people were just bored and weren't paying attention. And then his father sees us and he sits down. His father stands up and just tells a simple story. He says that there was a lady who set out a table spread of food. Her family was coming to the table to eat. And before they could get there, there was a cat that snuck in and ran and grabbed a piece of chicken from the plate and then bolted out of the room before they sat down to eat their food. Allah, these people over here start crying. These people people are just impacted by that story, and la ilaha illallah. And that later they started asking, and each one had a different interpretation of it. One of them started saying, Astaghfirullah, that's like my wrong deeds. Is it just when I think that I'm about to do something good, shaitan comes, and this person thought this meaning, this person thought this meaning. And they had these different meanings that they were inspired to from a very simple metaphor. And that is one of the signs of the great inheritors, is that when they speak, they speak oftentimes in very simple ways, and the ways that they usually work is in the batin, is internally. And that there's immense barakah in what they say despite its simplicity. And what happens is that Allah Ta'ala, through His grace and His mercy, will inspire different people in the gathering with different meanings that come from that same thing. And each person actually thinks that they're being spoken to individually. That's one of the signs of the inheritors. And so that the essence in the heart of da'wah, as we said before, 80% of it is dua, and 20% of it is outwardly calling people. The reality of da'wah though is nur. The reality of da'wah is nur. And that the more that we tap into this nur, the more light that we have in our hearts, the more light that we have in our hearts that comes from belief and implementation of the Sharia of Sayyidina Muhammad, the more that we will benefit others, period. And if we could combine to that nur, husn al-bayan, that being well spoken and correctly presenting this religion, then we've combined two of the great things that we need. Inshallah ta'ala, that we're going to look now at a few details of this. The first chapter is an incitement to call unto God. And if I may, at this juncture, and I apologize for going on so many tangents, but it's important that when we hear these types of words, that we understand, we put it in the proper context. When we talk about da'wah, that da'wah is not just restricted to teaching. It's not just restricted to public speaking. It's not restricted to standing in front of people. Is that this is why that we've chosen, in terms of the subheading of Al-Maqasid, to translate da'wah as service. Because if we translate da'wah as propagation or calling, that I think it's limiting its meaning. That da'wah essentially is service. And I used to know this man, Nasrullah. He was from the Banjar region of Indonesia. And that he told me is that when he used to work in the kitchen in Dar al-Mustafa, he said that every time that he'd wash a dish with the intention of washing away the sins of the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Every dish he'd wash, he's intending that this would be a means of washing away the sins of the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? Who's really a da'i? What kind of intention is that? That a person that's that aware. So da'wah is service. And that all of these people, Hassan Abdullah and his wife and everyone else that's done anything, and the people that have helped purchase this equipment here, and the people that have given donations, all of that is da'wah. That da'wah, if we translate it as service, is that it's all encompassing. It's anything that you do to help benefit other people. And that every single person, and this is what he's going to get to eventually, that has an obligation on their shoulders of da'wah. Every person has to give da'wah. It's not just for the scholars. Yes, certain types of da'wah are only for scholars. But there's a type of da'wah that's for everyone. Every single person is required. It's on their shoulders as a responsibility. As that if you can affect someone else positively and help them, and you don't do it, that you are shortchanging yourself. Is that you have to help everyone possible that's in your sphere of influence. And then that as your sphere of influence expands to your sphere of concern, is that you have a larger and larger scope. But the beautiful thing is that the scope of the sphere of influence of our Prophet ﷺ, that he was the only universal prophet. As for his sphere of concern, it transcends time, it transcends place, and it transcends this world. The sphere of his concern extends into the barzakh. It extends until Yawm al-Qiyamah, and it never ends. He will have concern for us as long as we are in Jannah, in paradise. And this is why Sayyid Abdul Aziz al-Dabbagh, that he says is that al-wasila, which is the highest place in paradise, which is the place where the Prophet will be with his family sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is also another proof, because when this early discussion we were having, is that the Prophet will be with his family in paradise. And so his family will be in the highest place of paradise because they're with the Prophet, even higher than the other prophets and messengers, because they're with him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that al-wasila is in the middle of paradise. And the reason that Sayyid Abdul Aziz Dabbagh says, and this is from Ulum al-Mukashafa, you're not going to find a hadith about this, The reason it's in the middle of paradise is because he wanted to be close to his ummah. Even in paradise, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's not that, oh, I want to be close to him as long as we're in the dunya. La. Even in Jannah, is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam will still be concerned for us. He will still check up on us. He will still come to visit us. We'll still get to sit with him. We'll still get to learn from him. We'll still get to be with him. Abad al-abad, eternally. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And that, so his sphere of concern that transcended all of this, his sphere of concern was for all people, in all times. And that outwardly he, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, didn't ever leave the Arabian Peninsula during his time except to travel to Sham, outwardly. But from the blessing of his inheritors and his strong intention and this amana that Allah placed on his shoulders, here we are in the northern Poconos 1400 plus years later talking about the realities of this deen in its pure, pristine, unadulterated form. And if you tap into these meanings that we're learning here, you will experience the realities. That's the beauty. Is that if you do what you're supposed to do, you will attain. It's a very simple, time-tested method that hundreds of thousands of people have become awliya throughout the centuries by doing exactly what we're attempting to do by tapping into this tradition. And that even though no one's making claims, is that the only claim that we're making is that we love the teachers that we took from. And we have no doubt about that connection. That's not a claim. That's something that just as the Sahaba didn't doubt their love, that they doubted all kinds of things when it came to themselves. That we all doubt, you know, our own deeds, whether any are going to be accepted. We all doubt, we know our own selves, whether we're going to be accepted in the presence of Allah. There's a lot of doubts that we have in terms of our own practice, but we know that we love the teachers that we took from. And that because of that, that the rest is on them. We're supposed to do what we're supposed to do, and the rest is on them. That, inshallah, which is, we hope that that will be a means for great bounty to descend upon all of us. So that I think it's important to make that clarification, that when we talk about da'wah, we mean it. You could use that interchangeably with service, is that we don't just mean speaking. It's whatever that you can do to help anyone or anything. And so what Shaykh Yahya was mentioning last night about Amir Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, protecting Christians from Druze, right, in Syria in the late 19th century, that's da'wah. And that for you to help someone who slips while they're walking on the street, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, that is da'wah. That is service. Da'wah is service and all of the meanings of service, and that it's an obligation for all of us that to do it to the extent possible, and it's meritorious to have some aspect of service that we have in our lives and dedicate ourselves to. So we're just going to read through this section that in chapter 1 titled Incitement to Call unto God, in his tremendous clear book, God the High, the Great, the Strong, the Firm says to his truthful, trustworthy messenger, call to the path of your Lord with wisdom and kindly exhortation, in reason with them in the most courteous manner. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'idati al-hasana wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan. But notice what it said here. Call to the path of your Lord. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika. Not call to yourself, not call to your ideology, not call to your organization, not call to any of these things that stem from selfishness. Call to the path of your Lord. And that's the sign of the true nature and the validity really of anyone's service is that are you calling to your Lord in that? Or are you calling to something related to your own self? If we're sincere that we're calling to the path of your Lord, that if someone else would better serve in the position you're in, you'd step down. If there was someone more qualified to do it exactly what you're doing, marhaban, this is about getting people to Allah. Please, take my position, I'm out. You wouldn't have envy. You wouldn't feel like, this is mine. A'udhu billah. And that's a test. If we feel like people are encroaching on our territory. This happens all the time in Islamic organizations. that you start to encroach on people's territory, then all of a sudden people get, right? They get, why are you going to my donors? Right? Why are you going to, and people start, like, there's a lot of selfishness that goes there. If this is about Allah and His Messenger, that we should be able to open up the doors for every ahlan wa sahlan. And that if we find someone that can do it better, step down and do it better. And those meanings have to be there. So that's the first thing. Ud'u ila sabili rabbika, call to the path of your Lord. And when was the last time that we really, and we'll have a lot of people giving khutbah, but when was the last time that we really were affected by a khutbah that we could really say it was calling to the path of our Lord? And sometimes the nature of many of these sermons that we hear, it's alhamdulillah, there's Jummah going on. I won't be too negative. But ya jama'ah, we need to raise the bar. We need to raise, this is an amana. You are na'ib an Rasulillah. You are speaking on behalf of the Prophet. The pulpit is his pulpit. And this is why that when Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq took the pulpit after Rasulullah, he wouldn't stay on the same step. He took a step lower. Sayyidina Umar took a step even lower than Sayyidina Abu Bakr. Right? This is the pulpit of Rasulullah. It is an amana when you step up there. You don't call to yourself. You don't call to your political ideology. That you don't bash other. The purpose of the khutbah is to call to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And with what? With wisdom. This is amazing. You could just go so long in looking at these words. When there are people that are calling, is it calling with wisdom? What is all the necessary constituents for it to be considered wisdom? There's a lot. And not only that, وَالْمَوْعِدَةِ الْحَسَنَةِ, and kindly exhortation, وَجَادِلْهُمْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and reason with them in the most courteous manner. And that I had a friend of mine who was involved in interfaith, and he was someone who was lethal. Like he could just, like literally, just like he's lethal. He was and is lethal. Now he's even more lethal. And he told me one time he debated someone, and that he just demolished this person so bad. This person came to him and said, "You know what? You're not debating me. You're debating me. The only reason you're debating me is that you're trying to just ruin me. Right? You're not really debating me because you're trying to prove to me the truth." And he said that statement resonated with him to this day. He said because he was right. That if you're debating someone to demolish them, you shouldn't be involved in debate. Imam Shafi used to say that never once did I debate with anyone else except that I wanted the truth to come on their tongue and not mine. If that's your state, debate. Which one of us, when it gets heated, we're trying to argue a point, that we want the truth to come on their tongue and not ours? Who has a pure nafs like that? Right? But that's a standard. That if we have not met that standard, we call ourselves to that standard. And if we fall short and we find ourselves arguing, we remind ourselves. And we stop. And we try to uphold the standard. And reason with them in the most courteous manner. For your Lord knows best those who have strayed from His path, and He knows best who are rightly guided. And God exalted be He says, say, this is my path, I call to Allah clear-sightedly. I and those who follow me. Transcendent is God, and I am not among those that associate others with Him. Ad'u ila Allah ala basira. This also tells us about da'wah. These words like nur, these words like basira, inner sight, that clear-sightedly, that wisdom. Where are these from the call? For those that are calling, if it's even originally a call to the sabil and the path of Allah tabarak wa ta'ala. And so this is the essence of this call, as everything that was mentioned. And God exalted, He says, and who could be better in speech than one who calls others to God, does what is right, and says, I am one of the Muslims. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. And one of the meanings that we can take from this is that you have people that will say on an airplane, if they're asked if they're Muslim, say, no, I'm Sufi. I know people have told me that sometimes they say that because they're so embarrassed about the state. La, come on. That, innani tawqeed, innani. Inna is already tawqeed, innani. Indeed, I am one of the Muslims. We should never be hesitant about our name, about who we are, about what we believe. No, we should assert that this is the greatest blessing of all that your Lord has given you and I. That we should be very firm and assert the reality of Innani min al-Muslimin. And then, and God exalted be, He says, let there arise from you a group who invite to goodness, enjoin what is right and forbid evil. Such are they who are successful. So calling unto God and unto His path, religion, obedience is a characteristic and trait of prophets and messengers. Upholding it, and for that purpose God sent them and ordered them and counseled them, encouraging and inciting them therein. Similarly, there are errors from amongst scholars who act in accordance with their knowledge. Saints and righteous folk have closely adhered to them and followed in their footsteps. Thus, they remain regardless of time and condition, calling people into the path and obedience of God through words and deed, maintaining an air of seriousness and endeavor in their desire for God's pleasure, out of compassion for God's servants, in hope of God's reward and adherence to the messenger of God. He said, whoever calls unto guidance, he will have the reward, the like of the reward of those that follow him, without that detracting from the reward in the slightest. And whoever calls unto deviation, he will have the sin of the like of the sins of those that follow him, without that detracting from their sin in the slightest. He said, the one who guides unto good is similar to the good doer, the do-gooder. And the verses, prophetic traditions, and narrations of the early community that have been transmitted in relation to the issue of calling unto God and His path and the preeminence of that are well known and numerous. Everything that is transmitted regarding the dissemination of knowledge and learning, the excellence of admonitions, reminders, even in regards to the excellence of jihad in the way of God, and enjoining good and forbidding evil, is considered to be an essential part of and beneath the rubric of the excellence of calling unto God. Exalted be He and His path, as all of the aforementioned are merely categories and subdivisions of it. That's all we will take today. The one thing that I will say is that we live in a time that people are strayed so far from the fitrah that it becomes, which is ironic, more difficult and easier at the same time to share truth with them. And more difficult because is that the more that people stray from the natural disposition, is that the less commonalities, there's less bridges that one has in their discourse towards them. But at the same time, interestingly enough, is that products of the mess of the modern world are suffering so much and are steeped in such darkness, the slightest light, right, attracts them at the same time. So it really is twofold. And in the end, is that once that we recognize is that every human being will make their own choices. And every human being will be given opportunities and windows, doors that will open for them at a very subtle, deep level. And if they consciously that choose to explore those doors that open up for them, it will lead to another door opening, and it will lead to their guidance without doubt. This is one of the meanings of the words of Allah, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. That applies in a specific context to Muslims, that also applies in a general context to Muslims and non-Muslims. Those that strive in our ways, we shall surely, those who strive for our sake will surely guide them to our ways. Is that meaning, is that those that make that conscious effort to be able to entertain the possibility of a truth and belief in that truth and submission to that truth and are concerned about the matters of ultimate concern, is that if you put in that energy, or at least intend to have that energy emanate from you, or that you even intend someday to be a person who go, then if you even, the first step has to come from you. And if you so much as make that first inclination, that you will find that Allah will open up a door for you. And we quoted yesterday the hadith of our Prophet, the hadith Qudsi, in fact, divine saying, that من تقرب إلي شبرا تقربت إليه ذراعا ومن تقرب إلي ذراعا تقربت إليه باعا ومن أتاني يمشي أتيته هرولا. Whoever draws near to me a handspan, yani who puts in the effort to come towards me, that I will come towards him at arm's length, a cubit. Whoever comes towards to me at arm's length, a cubit, I will come towards them a fathom. And a ba' is your arms spread out like this. Whoever comes to me walking, I will come to them running. Meaning you put in that initial effort, Allah Ta'ala opens up the doors. And so I think it's important for us to realize that, is that the idea of wisdom is very important, especially in our time, given the complexities oftentimes of people's mentalities, is that there's a lot going on up there with so many people. And that oftentimes is that the more sophisticated that someone is, oftentimes the harder it is to reach those people. Shaykh Abu Bakr bin Salim used to say that a Bedouin who, I'm just quoting, I mean this is hyperbole, yani, that he wanted to drive home this point. He used to say that the Bedouin that comes to me that urinates on his leg and doesn't know how to clean himself properly, he says that I can train him and he can attain closest to God in a short period of time. He says is that the intelligent city dweller that comes to me that thinks they're sophisticated will sit with me and sit with me and sit with me and not benefit at all because of compound ignorance. If there's compound ignorance, is that you have to unwind and untie that ignorance before anything that you say is actually going to set in and take root in the heart. But the beautiful thing is that the power, with the power of nur and the power of light, is that all those veils can be penetrated very quickly. And I'll stop, it's time for Sheikh Muhammad's class. But I've seen that with my own family. And I've told the story on numerous occasions, so you all know the story. But I've seen it with my own father, who was as far as could be from Islam. And that when he came to visit me in the Muslim world, and he met my teachers, is that he went from someone that was not very fond of Islam to someone literally in one gathering that changed 180 degrees to the opposite side. And it was the first time and only time in my life that I've ever seen my father cry, ever. And something just like penetrated through the depths of all of those veils of living and being born in 1937 in his country, growing up in the 50s. He was between World War II and the Korean War. He spent some time in Korea, although he's in the army, but he wasn't in the war. And that born most of his life in Kansas, moved out to California, and all of his experiences and everything that he went through and everything that would have potentially veiled him, that within a matter of 2 hours, all those veils were penetrated. And that he even felt like a deep sense of ruhaniyah, of spirituality, and of an aura that comes from the power of dhikr, of remembrance of Allah Ta'ala, and the power of wilayah, of sainthood that Allah Ta'ala grants people. And this is why this is, you know, it's a two-way street. We, in the outward, have to attempt to be very nuanced and use a lot of wisdom, and that's a good thing to do from the standpoint of outward. But the foundation is this other aspect, is this internal aspect. That if you don't have this, that's not going to benefit you very much. You know, it's in the realm of this bab. If you have it, you know, there'll be little ripples. But if you really want to have a profound impact, is that it has to be grounded in these meanings that we're discussing. So inshallah we will now move on. We'll take, I guess, a short break, I hope. I went over again, please forgive me. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam, alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wa ala. Alhamdulillah, that we're going to continue on inshallah with this text, Tawad as-Sa'diyah, felicitous ascensions. But again, every time that we talk about this topic of da'wah, is that we have to keep in mind is that we need to rescue this term from many of its misuses and its abuses, and that this term, that we need to have it needs to be crystal clear in our minds about the purity, about the importance of the term in and of itself, but also the purity of the term. And that it should, even if there is someone who in the name of this da'wah is doing whatever it is that they do that doesn't really have anything to do with the real nature of it, is that this term still should remain pure in our minds. And this is a challenge. This is a challenge. And that just in general, you'll find that in this whole topic of enfranchisement, is that one of the signs of an enfranchised people is that the group won't be taken, they won't be blamed for the act of the group won't be blamed for the act of the individual. And that you could also apply that even linguistically, is that the individual's uses of terms, is that if that term becomes enfranchised, is that those individuals' uses of the terms won't take from the true meaning of that term. And you could have a whole retreat on that topic, where the whole retreat is just on that a few terms. There's a really interesting book that a friend of ours, Shaykh Omar Qureshi, pointed out to me by Raymond Williams, titled Keywords, and that chooses these keywords and he traces their etymology and their history, and that how they came to be known, that as the way that how they came to be used the way that they're now used. It's a really interesting book, and there's so much in that, how this term evolved historically and so forth, and then the way that it is used now, and that there's other examples of works that are trying to do something similar. There's also a really important book that William Chittick mentions in Science of the Cosmos, Science of the Soul, titled Plastic Words, which is slightly of a different topic, but it's also very, very interesting, and about how many of the words that are being used in a sense today are like plastic words. And perhaps one of the reasons he titled it as such is just as plastic is one of the great signs of the times of manufacturing, that the manufacturing of our times and the way the things are manipulated for very cheap prices and then distributed globally. Likewise, many of these words that are now being used, it's like plastic compared to some previous strong old style materials. And that words are very, very important. So we could have had an entire retreat on just words and hammering home and correcting misconceptions of these words, because they have to be crystal clear. That we have to reach a point in our communities that I almost feel like when we encourage people to give da'wah at times, there's a lot of people that hear that and accept that. But then there's people that hear that, and for whatever reason, there's like a hesitancy. And that, why is that hesitancy there? That why do you feel hesitant to even use that word? And that needs to be dealt with, and that needs to be mended. So that's not what we're going to be doing in this session, except indirectly. But we've reached now chapter 2, and that this is the chapter that is subtitled, that who has been entrusted with calling unto God. And that really we're going to just breeze over much of this, and much of it is very straightforward, and that much of it can be read on one's own. And we want to get to what is beyond this in this session, which is at the start of chapter 4. But we wanted to just look into this, and this is based upon, we heard Sheikh Muhammad Mendez yesterday mention Sheikh Uthman Danfodio, and that him saying that if you learn something from the religion, a particular chapter or a particular aspect of worship like wudu or whatever it might be, is that you have become a scholar in that particular legal issue, and that you must teach it if you're asked. That's also the statement. Imam al-Ghazali said the exact same thing, and perhaps Sheikh Uthman that took it from him. And this is something that is really important, and we've had a number of conversations with people like Uncle Hamid about this, about the importance of that empowerment, for lack of a better. We got to find a better word for it, but until we find a better word, that we'll just use this word, empowerment. And I think that oftentimes that in our communities that you have amazing people that have amazing things to be offered, but for some reason that we don't have a methodology in place to be able to get people's abilities to the community, to the service of others. And that is something that we need to think very strategically and in depth about, how we can be means to get the individual abilities of our community members. And sometimes you have the most beautiful people that are with you, and that there's not a mechanism in place for us to have their abilities reach that others that are around them, or as much as their reach could possibly be. And that this is what I understand from the statement of our Prophet ﷺ, which would be the scriptural proof of empowerment. What did our Prophet ﷺ said? What did he say? بَلِّغُ عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً. Convey on behalf of me, even if a verse. Meaning, you learn a verse, then you can convey that. And that, as was also mentioned by Sa'ad, but to reiterate, and oftentimes when you hear it from 1, 2, 3, 4 different sources, that it helps in understanding, just as our concept of a mutawatir hadith that has multiple chains of transmission. When you hear it from different people, that's actually really good. And it's always amazing to see some of the same lines of thought and threads of thought in the different sessions. And in reality, it's the easy answer to that is because this is all the deen of the Prophet ﷺ. I always used to be amazed at many of the questions that I would ask in the desert of Yemen, that then when I would go to the desert of Mauritania and ask the same questions and get virtually the same answers. It's amazing how that could be with desert people, completely remote, that have never had any interactions, that have different schools of thought, that have entirely different circumstances, and that it's essentially the same thing. And that is the power of the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ, and it's also the importance of the Arabic language as a liturgical language and as a scholarly language that allows us to be able to communicate with people worldwide. When we meet at Hajj, say with people from Mindanao in the Philippines, but if they've learned the technical language of Arabic, then that there's a mode and means of communication. That's a great blessing of Allah Ta'ala. So that, having said that what he's going to do in chapter 2 and in chapter 3 is describe in great detail who has been entrusted. And from here forth, we'll just use the term, Dawah. Who's been entrusted with Dawah? And that, as you'll see, he'll mention a few examples of some of the more prominent types of people, but in reality, is that it's comprehensive. Is that everyone has a relationship to this. And that then in chapter 3, what he does is that he talks about some of the misconceptions or delusions, illusions, inhibiting factors that come between these various classes of people, in between giving back and taking part in this active process of da'wah. So let's just look at a little bit of this, and again we're going to skate through this. That he says, God exalted as he said to his beloved, say, this is my path. I call to Allah clear-sightedly, I and those who follow me. This noble verse is clarified that calling unto God is the path of all of the believers who adhere strictly to the example of the master of the messengers. It is incumbent upon all Muslims due to the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is the Quranic proof, is that it's comprehensive. It's not just for one class of people. Ana wa man ittaba'ani, I and those who follow me, meaning is that those who follow me is general. It doesn't just apply to one person or one type of person. It's general. And then the hadith, you will indeed order good and forbid evil, otherwise God will send unto you a punishment such that you will call upon him and he will not answer you. Whoever from amongst you sees evil, then he should change it with his hand. If he cannot, then he should change it with his tongue. And if he cannot, then he should change it with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith. Meaning that it's very important that someone actively take part in bringing good to their society, being in service of their community, that we won't remain stagnant. Is that we need to develop an agenda and a strategy moving forward that is wise and strategic, but is unapologetic. That it's that doing what we need to do
And that, yes, we might need a few sessions to deal with some of the theoretical reasons on why we feel that we have our backs up against the wall, why we might feel ashamed to be able to express certain aspects of our religion in public, and that when we check our hearts and that we see that there still is iltifat, turning to people and worried about what they think. This is where we have to have deep tasawwuf and piety come in. That once we get through all of that though, that we also need to be able to learn how to develop our own way of presenting these in a sense transcendent teachings of our Prophet ﷺ, because they transcend time and place in our context here. This is essential. And that the beauty of it is that the United States is a very large country, and there's a lot of different types of people from very diverse backgrounds. So this is why it is so important for everyone to take part, is that not one person is going to be the savior of everyone else. Is that you are going to learn things, just even in our microcosm that are here, you're going to learn things from Imam Taha that you're not going to learn from anyone else. You're going to learn things from Shaykh Jihad that you're not going to learn from anyone else. You're going to learn things from all of the different wonderful people here. The sisters are learning things from Shaykh Atama that they're not going to learn from anyone else. And this is the beauty. And this is the nature, and this is the sunnah of the scholars who came before us, is that they took the best from everything. And like the bee, that when you choose the choice part of the plants regularly, i.e. the pollen and the pollen of the flowers and the buds and so forth, is that you will then synthesize that and produce that which is good. And then that he says here in the hadith, God has never sent a prophet unto a people prior to me, except that from amongst his people were disciples and companions that adhered to his way and followed his decrees. Then indeed they would be succeeded by a generation that would say that which they do not do, and do that which they have not been sanctioned to. Thus whoever struggles against them with his hand is a believer, whoever struggles against him with his tongue is a believer, whoever struggles against him with his heart is a believer, and beyond that lies not even a mustard seed of faith. And that these ahadith are indicating to us that nothing other than the importance of preserving the integrity of these teachings. If you really think about this, is that our teachings have been transmitted for 1400 plus years until they've reached us here this day. Is that our Prophet spoke in this language because that he was well aware of many of the trends that were going to face this ummah. He tells us in very stark detail about some of the trends that are going to happen, about some of the nature of the times that are going to come. He was well aware of them, and his Lord that gave him knowledge of many of them. And that the point of this is that how can you preserve the integrity and the pristine nature of the teachings despite all of these vicissitudes that are going to come generation after generation and century after century? That is a monumental task. And this is one of the greatest proofs to me of our good loving Lord, where there's certain understandings that people purport of the deen that really in a sense point towards having a bad opinion of Allah. Meaning that Allah is the Lord of history, and that if we follow some of the necessary steps of thinking to some of these narratives, that in a really broken down, simplified form, it's trying to cause us to believe is that things were wonderful in the beginning, and then the heresy seeped in, and it was there for several hundred years, and then we had someone come and uproot that heresy, but then it came back again, and then it lasted that way for several hundred years, and then only from the past 200 years that this person came in this remote place of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, and I shouldn't use names of places, that then all of a sudden saved us from that all of this heresy of these centuries. And the only scholars that we're going to quote are about 3 or 4, maybe 5, and then modern scholars. The entire other tradition is worthless, and not only worthless, astray, dal and mudil, and will lead you astray. Yani, it's amazing to me how someone could accept that. And excuse me for being so blunt, that we were blunt the other night. I'm holding back. I'm trying to, I could be blunt on this issue too, but I won't. But seriously, Yani, like, I don't understand how a thinking person could ascribe to that and be coded that it's all about the Quran and the Sunnah. Sorry, Nan, I know, I don't know. Like, seriously. I don't know how someone can just accept that. Like, it just is, if you just read like a pamphlet about our history, that's enough to like inoculate yourself to be, protected from that. And that how a thinking person could ascribe to that, I don't know. That what is being discussed here by Shaykh Yahya and Shaykh Muhammad and others on this platform is that if we would have some type of mathematical way of proving this, is that virtually every single scholar of hadith, of tafsir, of fiqh, of balagha, of lugha, of nahu, of whatever science that it is, mantiq, every single one of them was either, from the period of about 200 to 300 on, either Maturidi or Ash'ari of Aqidah. They followed one of the four schools. They were either Hanbali, Maliki, Shafi, or Hanafi. And that many of them, including some of the proponents of this themselves, had spiritual paths. And they affiliated with spiritual paths. That is our history. You can't overstep that history. It's there. And that how all of a sudden we're to think all of these people were astray. And that now, because of this newfound understanding that we have, that everything's going to be fine, and we're going to rescue the Muslims from idolatry. To me, it's totally ridiculous to even postulate that. Anyhow, that what we're talking about now is preserving the integrity. And this is why, is that, bearing this tradition is not easy. How can you craft, because it's a craft, how can you craft and help preserve this tradition and to ensure that it is going to get to the next generation that in that pristine form? And this is why that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this beautiful tension between that, if you will, strictness and leniency, if you will, more of a willingness to deal with the signs of our time and a less of a willingness in order to preserve the integrity of the tradition. You find this tension. And this is a beautiful tension. And it relates partially to what we were speaking about the other day about law, but it applies in the context of da'wah as well. Is that you will find people that are not open, scholars that are not open to that fully engaging the modern world. And if they are rightly guided scholars and not of a group the likes of the one that I mentioned, then that is actually a positive thing. Because that type of scholar is going to help preserve the integrity of the teaching. And then also on the other side of the scale is that you have those that are more willing. But what I'm really trying to get at is this diversity is our strength, and there is an unwritten, unsaid, positive tension between these two sides of the spectrum. And that it helps those that are on this side of the spectrum from going too far. Because that it's very important that we read about the history of Christianity and what happened to the Protestants and what happened to the Catholics and what happened to the various religious groups as they entered into this secular modern world. That we need to really take this seriously. How are we going to now, as we're coming to the forefront of this now? We just have now our first Muslim college at Zaytuna College, which we should all support at the bottom of our hearts and do everything that we can to help them and assist them. That the Catholics and Protestants have had universities for a long time. This is the first Muslim college in the United States. And that there's going to be a number of challenges that arise. How in that realm of academia and all of the principles that underlie it and the underlying assumptions that are behind it, are we going to be able to preserve the integrity of our teachings? That is a big, huge question. And how are we going to understand the trends that happen to many of the other religious communities and withstand that so that we can preserve our own integrity without being isolationist and fully engaging. This is at the heart of everything. This is at the heart of these misunderstandings that we've been seeing. This is at the heart of why you have people that could be termed, and this is just borrowing convenient terminology, that are termed extremists or modernists or secularists or nationalists or any of these other categories that we have. This is why that you have all of this. This is why now you even have to speak of a traditional or classical Islam. 200 years ago, there wasn't anything except classical Islam. That's all that existed. You didn't have to speak about it. Just as that nowadays you have to speak about organic food. You didn't have to speak about organic food before because everything was organic. You didn't have to speak about the sacred so much because people were living in the world of the sacred. Their language was living in the world. Everything about the society was in a sense still, and this is even in Europe, until the great chain of being successively broke down over several centuries. And then that it was replaced with a secular ideology. This tries to uproot God from everything, and that in a sense that the secular is the opposite of the sacred. Because that belief in God is that something can't have truly intrinsic sacred nature. But this is right at the heart of these issues. And it's very important that we speak about it openly. And that's why I really, really have benefited and appreciate Shaykh Jihad's openness and honesty in clarifying to us not only the individual understanding of the question that was asked earlier about the good question about occasionalism, but how and why so many people in our communities might have that be the first thing that comes to their mind. That we have to understand the individual aspect, but also the trend. And in understanding the trends, and the same thing is, by way of example, is Orientalist scholarship. Is that we have to understand the principles underlying Orientalist scholarship. If you know that an Orientalist is studying something related to our religion, and they have already ruled out from the beginning revelation, or any type of explanation that relates to belief in God, that's their modus operandi, and this is how they're approaching their particular study. And what do you expect them to come to then? There's no way that they're going to ever come to the conclusion that you're seeking looking from a theocentric worldview, except in rare cases where there's overlap. If you understand that, is that you will then expect much of what has been said. And that some of it is, you read it and it's utterly ridiculous. And that it's nothing other than mental gymnastics and mental acrobatics. Where that it's just like fluff, and it's a joke, especially the deeper you get into it, and you start to actually see that how they made that assessment and then that claim based upon what they know or what can be known about that period or that time or that name or this term. I read something recently just utterly ridiculous about Ahl Bayt. And how it wasn't used until like the second or third. So what are you talking about? It's a Quranic term, right? That the Prophet ﷺ said to his own family, Allahumma, that after that verse was revealed, that these are my Ahl Bayt. Yani, فَذْهَبْ عَنْهُمَ الرِّجْسَ, remove from them that all impurities. The Prophet spoke to the people that were directly related to him, that they heard that term. Anyhow, that preserving the integrity is really, really important. And that in our attempt to indigenize Islam here in the United States of America, in our attempt to have a homegrown American Islam, all of these things that we support in principle, but we have to realize is that it's beyond the effort of a single individual. And that the positive intention that exists is our strength and not our weakness. And I think we were speaking earlier, and I think this is a good point to mention this, because I was committed to at some point touching on this, is that we really want to attempt to break through many of these dichotomies that we have, that are facing the Muslim community here. Is that we have a number of dichotomies that you and I are all going to be facing. Right? The famous convert immigrant dichotomy. And the way that these things are set up in terms as if you have to choose one side or the other, where it's actually led oftentimes to, saying very disrespectful things about those who came to this country. And let's just all keep it real. Everyone here is an immigrant. If we really wanted to have a convert immigrant discussion, let's go find the remains of the Native Americans who have been relegated to the worst lands in the reservations. Is that we're all immigrants. Now, some people might have been brought involuntarily, other people voluntarily, but let's just understand that to begin with. And that secondly, though, is that whatever happened to the beautiful experience of just loving Muslims? That oftentimes, that I'm not saying people haven't been pushed away or whatever else. We have to assess those problems. But at the same time, I remember becoming Muslim and that just loving everyone Muslim that was around me, whether they were from Iraq or whether they were from Pakistan or whether they're from Malaysia, or whether or not they spoke English with an accent or not, or anything else. That to me is what helps solidify my Islam. Without that, if people don't have a strong sense of community in the beginning, then how are they going to be, and this is something we have to be committed to, is that we love our brothers for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. Is that we shouldn't allow ourselves to get dragged into dichotomies. We choose whether or not we are going to affirm a dichotomy or not. You can break that dichotomy, but it takes courage. You have to have the courage to break through that dichotomy. And people should have that courage, is that if you see someone that you don't know their background, instead of developing a preconceived notion about what they think about you, go sit with them. And I guarantee you that if you have a physician, I'm not even going to mention countries, you have a physician that is very well off and he sits with someone who is not very well off, and they sit down and you would be amazed at what they're able to come to and how much they have in common, and they'll probably become very close friends. And the next time they see each other, feel a deep, profound sense of love for one another. And so I think this is really, we have to get beyond all of this. And there have been some short-sighted people, without doubt. There is problems, without doubt. We have to assess those problems, and then we have to provide solutions to get out of those problems. However, we cannot let ourselves get caught in any dichotomies, whether they be racial or whether they be social or whatever nature that they are. Is that we have to get beyond that. Otherwise, it's antithetical to what I understand this deen to be. It's antithetical of what I understand the Prophet ﷺ telling Abu Dhar that he has in him jahiliyyah, and he was a Ghifari tribesman who was very proud, and then he goes to Bilal after he called him the son of the black woman, and he puts his head on the ground and he says to Bilal that Wallahi billahi alayk, you have to place your foot on Muhammad's cheek. And Bilal wasn't like, you insulted me, I'm placing my foot on your cheek. He was weeping. He said, I already forgave you before you even said it. And he was weeping as he puts his foot on his cheek. Who were these people? Now that is an ideal. It is an ideal. And like any ideal, and like everything that relates to our religion, we do not just subscribe to a worldview that relegates the human being to the plenary realm. No, we are required to work towards the ideal. It is an ideal that we have to work towards, that we have to consciously check ourselves in that moment, that what is the right thing to do, and then to do it. And so that in the end, I really think that our diversity is what gives us that strength, and that in all of its facets, and how we can learn to appreciate that people that are different or that have different upbringings and have the courage to be able to experience the realities of others, whatever those might be. And that hopefully is that if you can get beyond that, to me, and if you want me to really keep it real, I don't think that Islam is really going to become rooted in this country until we can have a very practical solution to many of the deep social problems of this country. That if we can do that, and we can be successful, even if the only way that we can do it successful is at a retreat like this. And mashallah, tabarakallah, we have a very diverse crowd People that were born into Islam, people that converted to Islam, people from different places in the Muslim world, people from different backgrounds from within the United States. And to me, that the more diversity, the more beautiful it is. And there's a lot that we can learn from one another, but we have to have the courage, to do that. And then assist that in outward ways so that we can all benefit from each other and learn from one another, but really work towards this ideal that we see these things as our strengths. So you see this tension, and I'm still trying to get some of this out, and it's maybe I'm not articulating it as I should, and we can maybe return to this point further. But you have this positive tension throughout the generations, and we have to see it as such. And the last thing I'll say on this point is that I think maybe will help in it, is that based upon what we mentioned in the fiqh class yesterday morning, is that Imam al-Sha'rani in his book Al-Mizan al-Kubra, that he says that all of the individual differences in law that ultimately are on two sides of the spectrum. It's like a scale. It is between what you could call strictness and leniency. And that all differences of opinion will fall somewhere on these two sides of the scale. From strictness to leniency. Strictness to leniency. And that what he's essentially trying to assert is that this is part of the merciful nature of the teachings of the Prophet. Is that you will have people that incline towards strictness. You will have people that incline towards leniency, but all of them are from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And there's a verse in the Quran that one of the books that we either mentioned or didn't mention yesterday by Ibn al-Mawaq, the great Maliki scholar who died in the same year of the beginning of the Spanishing of the fall of Granada, 1492, is that he quotes a verse that he bases, in a sense, his entire book upon. ثُمَّ أَوْرَثْنَا الْكِتَابَ الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا فَمِنْهُمْ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمِنْهُمْ مُقْتَصِدٌ وَمِنْهُمْ سَابِقٌ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ. And then we bequeath the book to those that we have chosen from amongst our servants. So every group that's now going to be mentioned is chosen by God, meaning that's something special. فَمِنْهُمْ, from among them are those that have oppressed their own souls. From among them are those that are somewhere in the middle. And from among them are those that are at the foremost of all good. It's that you find different breakdowns and you find different abilities that people have. And that in the end is that diversity is a mercy, because you can't have a universal religion without that. If we were all expected to be like a one particular type of person, who could be like that? No one can do that. To me, that's antithetical to the whole understanding of the universality of the religion of our Prophet ﷺ. And so in that regard, is that you're going to have people that are more conservative. And conservatism is a beautiful thing, if it is applied appropriately. If someone is conservative in themselves, and that they themselves don't force that upon other people who aren't able to do that, it's a beautiful thing. And that if people want to have a conservative approach to Islam, then they should be encouraged to do so, that with certain criteria. And if people that incline towards a more lenient approach, is that as long as they're still within the fold, they should be encouraged to do that, again, with certain criteria. It's not a free-for-all, but my point is that different people fall somewhere else in the spectrum. And one of the most beautiful experiences I had, and I mentioned this recently, and this is why that part of what I was mentioning about dichotomies, we have so much to learn. Oftentimes what we're now having to theorize with our words, people have already done in this country 20 to 30 years, but oftentimes because of some of these tendencies, whether it's arrogance or not arrogance or disregard or whatever it is that we don't appreciate some of the resources we already have here. In particular, just one example, that many of the great aspects of the Wadat Deen Muhammad community. Some of the most, that mosque was the mosque, I entered into a Wadat Deen mosque before I became Muslim, in Oakland, California, with my Osama Cannon's brother, Anas Cannon. And that when I entered into that mosque, that I wasn't Muslim. And I went and I made wudu, didn't even know how to make wudu. And I prayed Salat al-Jum'ah. The fact that that they opened up their doors to Salat al-Jumu'ah, it was ingenious. They had chairs set up for people to observe the Jumu'ah prayer. That is an amazing idea. That on a weekly basis, different people are visiting from other faiths. And it was a non-issue. No one was like, is he Muslim, is he not Muslim? I was like anyone else. And I prayed with them. And the sermon touched my heart. And then I walk up after, and I'm this kid from Los Gatos, California, suburb of southern of the Bay Area, and everyone was treating me like I'm like their long lost kin. And I was like, what is this? Right? That just completely threw my understanding of things upside down. And that experience, and then shortly after that, just reading a few basic things about Islam, was what, from past experiences and all the details, what led to my conversion. That was one of the most amazing experiences I had. Were I not to have had that experience, who knows? Maybe it would have taken me longer to convert. I don't know. But recently that we were in Detroit, and we had a wonderful iftar there. And I was just so amazed at this masjid, is that they had been able to create a community where there was no rupture. You could have taken someone from that local community who was steeped into kufr, and that come to that masjid, and there's no rupture. Meaning that they had their past life, but you put them now in this environment, and they're perfectly functional, and everything makes sense, and it's easy. And I was amazed at that. But one of the most amazing things I was noticing is that, I don't know how to put it except in a, slang way, no one was tripping off each other. It was amazing. Some people wearing Western clothes, some people wearing fatigues, some people wearing beautiful African garments, some other people wearing robes, some brothers had turbans, some brothers didn't have anything on their head. It was a whole array, and no one was tripping off each other. No one's like, you're more Muslim than me, you're trying to act like an Arab, you're trying to act, why don't you try? Yeah. No one was tripping off each other. Everything was fine. And what I realized is that we create our own problems by making a deal out of things that are not a big deal. We need to just get over a lot of this pettiness. In that Islam is organic. The Sahaba were organic. Is that they were human beings, yes, but it was organic. The way that they implemented the teachings of Rasulullah ﷺ and made it a part of their life. And this is why that it's a blessing to study from true inheritance, because I know that yes, we have a legal tradition, but we always have to balance that legal tradition with the tradition of the Spirit. And we have to balance both of relating these traditions to our own selves in our particular historical context with the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. There's times where I would go and ask my teachers questions. They would not give me a fiqh ruling. They would tell me, I asked my teacher one time about how our mosque should relate to that people that are not Muslim. And he said very simply, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that Muslims would enter into the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ. End of story. He knew very well the Maliki and the Shafi and the Hanafi opinion and the different conditions, one with permission, the other one without permission, one that mana' mutlaqan, the other one's permissible mutlaqan. He knew, he was aware of the scholarly aspect of it. But I appreciated that law is that balance of that, understanding. Right? If you see a lady fall in front of you, you go and pick her up. You don't need to think, oh my God, can I touch a woman or not? You pick her up, we have to at the same time know the hukum of Allah and everything, obviously. But what I'm saying is that it can reach a point where it becomes so mechanical that you lose the spirit. Or that you just focus on the spirit and forget that there's law. In the end, it's all about balance, between these two. And that this is something that again, we have to speak about theoretically because we don't have examples of how to do this. This should be something that we intuit as that we approach this religion. I'm really sorry, I was committed to getting through this, but those were very important points that pertain to Dawah. And what I will just say here is that I hope everyone reads this, because there's certain things that the scholar is responsible for. And the primary thing that the scholar is responsible for is teaching and the conveyance of his knowledge. And that he mentions a number, he mentions verses and a hadith that relate to that. Really realize this is an amana. And what Shaykh Jihad said was it's scary. This is an amana. You know, this deen is not a joke. It's an amana that when it be transmitted, and those that you know learn, even if it be a small amount, that there's an amana that goes along with it. And again, it's a balance. Is that anyone that comes to a retreat like this and takes good notes and learns something, is that you go out and teach that. You should teach that. And in a sense that you're almost required to teach that. And that it would be a very good thing for people to go home and to teach family members and different people and that be involved. That there are so many opportunities. We should have a Jummah in every high school where there's a lot of Muslims. There are so many opportunities where if you get a basic session of khatib training on how to do a sermon, is that you could be an effective speaker by taking from notes in topics that you've heard of different people and what they mentioned. And so that however it is, and a trust. The trust is that you convey that knowledge the way that you heard it. And if while you're conveying that knowledge, if you're asked a question, it's actually very simple. You just say, I don't know. The Prophet himself, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that in a hadith that he was asked a question, he said, La adri hatta as'al Jibreel. I don't know. Wait until I ask Gabriel. And he said, La adri hatta as'al Mikail. I don't know. Wait until I ask Mikail. And then Mikail brought the answer to Jibreel, who brought the answer to the Sayyid al-Wujud, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then informed, saying La adri is very important, to say that I don't know. And that it actually increases, it actually should increase our trust in that scholar or teacher when they say, I don't know. Because you know that when they say, I don't know, when they do tell you something, you know that they do know. You don't have doubt at that point where you say, is he just saying what he doesn't know and just filling in, or does he really not know? No, if he says he does, he knows. If not, I don't know. And that then you go back to people, and this is the way that it is that you go back to people that do know, and you get back to peoples and others. The student of knowledge that is held responsible in multiple ways for his quest for knowledge. One, he says here, in perfecting his intention for seeking knowledge. And that the intention that Shaykh Muhammad shared with us of Imam Haddad is that part of learning knowledge is that you make the intention to benefit yourself and others. And there's a hadith that says, it's one of the greatest hadith about the merit of seeking knowledge. Whoever has death come to them and they are actively seeking Islam, they are actively seeking knowledge in order to bring life to Islam, between them and the prophets on the Day of Judgment is 1 degree. Meaning that there's an active process of seeking knowledge. مَنْ جَاءَهُ الْمَوْتِ وَهُوَ يَطْلُبُ الْعِلْمِ لِيُحْيَى بِالْإِسْلَامِ فَبَيْنَ وَبَيْنَ الْأَنْبِيَاءِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ وَفِي الْجَنَّةِ دَرَجَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ. Secondly, but to bring life to Islam, and that's something that relates to an act with other people, is that secondly, Dawah is acting with one's own knowledge. That by acting with your knowledge in yourself, that you become an example. So again, back to this idea of the expansive understanding of this term Dawah. Thirdly, that teaching those that don't know, especially those who ask, even as a student, that one is required to do this. Then he also has a special section for official title holders, noble family members, students of scholars, different people that had distinction in traditional Muslim societies. Is that there are certain responsibilities that rely upon them, that are upon them, and then also the general populace, and all of us are general people. And that he says here that there's ways that dawah applies to them. One, ensuring that their dependents, such as their wives, children, family, and servants, are taught that which is legally incumbent upon them, and inciting them unto obedience and warning them against all disobedience. And he quotes the hadith of the Prophet, all of you are shepherds, as each of you are responsible for his flock. Is that taking care of one's family, and teaching one's family, and taking one's time to be with one's family. And this is something that I heard from those that know intimately the family of one of my primary teachers, Sayyid Habib Omar. As busy as this is, as many students, as much as he travels and everything, that he is reading a book with every single one of his, probably now 7, well, maybe some are not old enough to be reading yet, every single one of his children at an age that he's now reading, every single one of them he's reading a book with. Every single one of them, there's individual instruction. With all of his preoccupations and everything, is that family is a priority. And either teaching directly or indirectly and having other people, but facilitating. And that also, that doing one's best to adhere to the good and to help procure and spread that. And then to convey on behalf of the Messenger ﷺ that what has reached them. And then chapter 3, that deals with the various illusions that come to the minds of, let's say, the scholar. That, for instance, I do not act in accordance with my knowledge, so how on earth can I teach it and call unto it, when indeed warnings that suffice have been related in that regard? And then he dismantles that. And then there's another delusion that might come and then dismantles that. Meaning is that what he's trying to get across in chapter 3, which we'll leave for you to read because it's very straightforward, is that for these different classifications, whether it be scholars, students of knowledge, that's prominent people, or even common people, is that there is no precedence at all that should prevent someone from actively taking part in service, if we translate dawah as service. Everyone has to be involved in this at some level. Everyone needs to be empowered to give back in some way and to serve others in some way. And that everyone needs to find, if you will, and we'll end on this point because time is up, that everyone in this room here, well, speaking to people that are here, needs to find some type of service that they're attached to, whatever it might be. And that service could be being a physician. But if you're going to be that physician who that's your service, make your intention behind that really to help people. Even if you're charging, even if you're sending in payments for their insurance, make your intention to help them. And the sign that you're sincere of that, if someone comes to you without payment, that you still accept them. If it is, whatever it might be, what the beautiful story that Dr. Faiz Ahmed mentioned to us last night, of that man cleaning the dumpsters. That's dawah, ladies and gentlemen. That's dawah. Cleaning the dumpsters is dawah. And that, how is it not, there's a community benefit in that. That anything that anyone does, whether it's washing the dishes, or that whether it's lining up the shoes, or cleaning the latrines, or cooking the food, or running errands, or that supporting things financially, or whatever it is. And this is why, getting back to what we were trying to really drive home, is that we need everyone. We need different perspectives. We need different people with different backgrounds from these different perspectives that to work collectively. No one is going to work this out individually. We need everyone's input. We need everyone's to offer their area of specialization. So this is something that we encourage everyone to do, is to find some form of service, whether it be interfaith, whether it be humanitarian work, whatever it might be, is that the possibilities in a sense of dawah are endless. And we just have to see where we fit in. And make whatever it is that we know that we can do, that based upon our God-given abilities, because everyone has them, and everyone has that which the person next to him doesn't have. And we need to have people that help us develop those abilities, and then give back to the people accordingly. And it's actually very simple. But sometimes we find barriers, and those barriers, whether they're mental or in our communities, need to be broken down. And one of them, if I may pick on some of the more male-dominated tendencies in our communities, is that you hear this all the time where sisters feel, in a sense, disenfranchised. Like, just skip over the men, get to work, forget men. If it weren't for sisters, 2/3 of the da'wah work in the United States would not happen. Where are most of the programs, like seriously, that we all go to, where is most of the support? It is from the sisters. Really, and I'm not saying that, oh, you mentioned the sisters, you know, and it's the reality, yani. And that sisters need to be empowered, again, let's find a better word. Do your own, like the founder of both Azhar and the Qarwayin, that were women. They weren't waiting for a male to tell them to do this or not to do this. That even in the Ottoman Empire, that same thing. There was women who founded schools. There were women, and to me, the greatest proof of this is quite simply Sayyidah Khadija al-Kubra, the great wife of the Prophet ﷺ, is that she had a proactive role in the society. And that, subhanAllah, that nothing else needs to be said when we understood that, so that we need to break through, and sisters need to be encouraged and help that if that they find certain limiting factors within the male-dominated community, is that they themselves that do it on their own. And then attempt to do it in a way with ihsan and akhlaq, so it doesn't become, you know, raddat fi'l, that I'm doing this and we develop a bad opinion of those here. No. To do it with ihsan. And on the other side of the spectrum as well, that we should do things with the utmost akhlaq, and in the end, wal-aqibatu lil-muttaqeen, the end result is for the people of piety. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enlighten us. I apologize, Shaykh Muhammad, for going over. May Allah ta'ala bless us and enlighten our minds, hearts, bodies, and souls, inshallah ta'ala, with these understandings of this essential aspect of the irth and inheritance of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and to bless us to be people, inshallah ta'ala, who embody these meanings, at least understand them and do our best to live them, and that tap into that those that have mastered these and that have transmitted this knowledge, that from chest to chest, person to person, generation after generation, if we tap into this and we understand these principles, there will be immense potency behind them that will bring about great transformation and benefit for all people. Islam will adorn this country. It will ornament this country if it's brought correctly, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, if we truly understand what we're doing and understand things in the appropriate way. Wa sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Bismillah. So that we've now reached chapter 4, and again the details of chapter 3. I will leave that to you to read on your own. Chapter 4 is titled "The Meaning, Legal Nature, and Distinct Qualities of the Individual Call." In that we have somewhat of a working definition here that is being offered. And the definition starts by saying, to ponder deeply ways of saving humanity from heedlessness and remoteness from God, bringing them unto proximity and remembrance by employing a variety of methods and means, the practice of this whilst being sincere unto God and intending His noble countenance. So this is a definition, a working definition, and that what is important here to note is there is what is called i'mal al-fikr, that using one's mind to reflect, to ponder, to explore different possibilities of helping others, of serving others, of being a means for people to reconnect with their Lord. Because keep in mind again, is that the foundational verse that establishes da'wah, وَدَاعِيًا إِلَى اللَّهِ بِإِذْنِهِ, that our Prophet ﷺ was calling unto God through His permission, sallallahu alaihi وآله وصحبه وسلم. And that this time that we spend in i'mal al-fikr, this is actually a form of worship. Just as now that we're in these gatherings of learning, is that this is a form of worship. And that we are in the hilaq al-dhikr, about which our Prophet told us ﷺ, that إِذَا مَرَرْتُمْ بِرِيَاضِ الْجَنَّةِ فَارْتَعُوا. And that if you pass by the gatherings of dhikr, of remembrance, that graze therein, literally. وَقِيلُ وَمَا رِيَاضِ الْجَنَّةِ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. And what are these gardens of paradise, O Messenger of Allah? And the Prophet said, hilaq al-dhikr, the circles of remembrance. And that could refer to remembrance of God. That could refer to that these sessions of reflection and meditation that we're doing. And it could also refer to the learning that is taking place. And that when Allah Ta'ala that establishes in the Quran the foundations of what is called taqleed, following qualified scholarship, that Allah Ta'ala says that فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of remembrance if you do not know. And that the scholars have understood this verse to apply to the people of knowledge. And so there's a relationship between dhikr, that which no one doubts that is a form of worship, in between that one of the greatest types of dhikr, which might not come to mind that it actually is a form of dhikr, which is the active, the process and the act of studying. As that this is worship. Worship is of many types. And it doesn't just mean that the moving of the body or fasting or something of that nature. Is that in fact that your entire life could be made worship. And that when you do what your Lord has commanded you to do, whether it's be good to your parents, take care of your children or whatever, that all of that is worship in the broadest sense of the word. So here, that this time that we spent reflecting, this is one of the great things that we can do. And what I've heard my teachers say in this regard is that there's nothing that brings more happiness to the heart of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ than for people to reflect upon ways to teach his religion and to teach his sunnah. And that they mentioned by this a story that someone saw a dream, and in this dream that they were witnessing the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that speaking about a number of the great people of the time, and that the name of that person would be mentioned and the Prophet would praise them and mention their traits. And then they mentioned that a scholar by the name of Habib Ahmed bin Umar bin Sumait, who came after Imam al-Haddad but was in the legacy of Imam al-Haddad, and was known for focusing upon da'wah, constantly teaching, constantly doing things for people, traveling, reminding people, serving them. And that this one who saw this dream, that he said, is that when Habib Ahmed bin Umar bin Sumait was mentioned to the Prophet ﷺ, is that he would speak about him the entire night. And the reason of this is because that of what he was doing for people, and that we could be critical of certain aspects of da'wah, this charged term that many people again misunderstand. That however, that were it not to be for da'wah, were the Prophet ﷺ not have that poured these meanings into the hearts of the companions, you and I would not be sitting here today. Were it not to be that someone was concerned to speak to someone, to affect someone, then you and I, that especially those that converted, that would not be here today. And that in and of itself is sufficient to establish the importance of this. And thus, that the time that we spend reflecting, what are ways that we can help? What are ways that we can positively impact other people and to serve other people? That is worship, and it's one of the greatest things that we can do. In fact, that it is considered to be from these a'mal and these deeds that pierce veils very quickly. It's one of the quickest ways to receive that great futuhat, great openings. And that some spiritual paths actually, in fact, include da'wah as part of the integrals of the path. And that some of them even say that the Fath al-Akbar, the greatest opening, is in that serving other people. And this same Habib Ahmed bin Umar bin Sumayt, is that someone came to him and asking him that how I can attain the Fath Akbar and the greatest opening. And he said the greatest opening is in serving people, and that you find very quick fruits is that if you're in the service of people. And that, as we all know, that the Sayyid of the Qawm is their khadim, the master of the people, the preeminent person amongst the people is the one who serves them. And in reality is that the Prophet ﷺ was in service of humanity, in service of the companions, service of everyone who came after. Everything that he did, in a sense, ﷺ, was a type of service. And that service honors us, it raises us. Even if people of dunya and people of arrogance and people who are longing for social status see it as taking from their social status. And that, it's very unfortunate when you see different people's, the way that they treat their servants and just the sheer arrogance that they have, towards people. And I've seen some of, and many of you probably have seen even, but I saw, something that was just so troubling. We were in Medina al-Munawwara in the Movenpick Hotel, and you could see the haram right in front of you. And that it was breakfast time, there was a buffet, and there was a man, I'm assuming he was from India, or maybe Pakistan, or actually he was very light-skinned, maybe he was from Kashmir, I don't know. And that he was going around reminding people that that they were going to close the buffet. And then he comes across this man that is wearing a red gutra, and so I'll let you fill in the blanks, and white robe, and he's reminding him that the buffet's about to close. And he looks at him and he says, "Who do you think you are to talk to me while I'm eating breakfast? Don't talk to me while I'm eating breakfast." And I'm like, I was right there, I heard him say that, and I'm like, we're in Medina, and I see the haram, but you really want to sock this dude, but you can't really hit someone in the face. It's not befitting if I hurt him, and we're in Medina. And so you're conflicted on what you want to do. And that I just was trying to think, what should I do? And in the end, I felt I had to say something. And I said to him, I said, ta'addab, right? You're right in front of the haram, ta'addab. Don't speak to people like that. Oh. I later came to know that you're not supposed to say that to a Saudi, because in a sense that it's like telling him, it would be like saying in English, didn't your mother teach you manners, or something like that, as it was later explained to me. And he was just heated off. He didn't like that. But, you're in Medina Munawwara, who do you think you are, yani? That you have that privilege over someone to treat them like that. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. That's people of dunya. But people of akhira recognize is that service is that a way that will honor you. And it's one of the quickest ways, to pierce veils. And that those that have seen the way that things operate in Muslim countries, that oftentimes that those that become the heir of the teacher, or that attain great ranks with their Lord, they were people that used to serve. And there's numerous stories about that. One of them is a great scholar and wali by the name of Habib Adawi bin Abdullah Shihab, who named Habib Ammar. He was the father of one of the great teachers of Habib Ammar as well, and the grandfather of Habib Abdullah Shihab, who is still alive today. And that when he was in the Ribat of Tarim, which was the school that was founded in the early 14th century, around 1307, that he was teaching, he used to be in charge of the coffee. So all the other students were learning, and he was in charge of the coffee, and that he would serve the students coffee while they learned. And so some of the students after class just said, why are you spending all your time wasting the time making coffee? Why don't you come learn with us? And people kept at him, and it bothered him. So one day he shows up in the class, and he didn't make the coffee. And that his Shaykh, Habib Abdurrahman Mashwar, the Sahaba, Bughiyat al-Mustarshideen, that he saw him in class. He says, Adawi, why aren't you making coffee? And he explained to him what had happened. And he said that, make coffee, you're going to receive an opening that all these people here in class are going to become your students. and that he kept serving and kept serving, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him great openings, that he became the Shaykh of the Ribat, and all of those that were attending the class of Habib Abdul Rahman eventually were his students. And that is one of the great ways to receive very, very great openings. And if you're sincere in doing that. And so, but this time that we spend pondering deeply about this, that is one of the great things that we can do. And the idea behind this is that the most important aspect of da'wah, yes, that we were saying 80% of it is dua, yes, is in a very organic way, just being and living the realities of this deen. But it doesn't neglect this aspect either, of having a strategy, of really that thinking and how can we help people? What can we do? That what is going to be of benefit? It doesn't negate that side of it either. That is important, and that if it's done in the right way, this is one of the great ways that we can spend our times. And so then, that moving along in this text, that he says here, in relation to this individual call, is that there are two types of people in that regard. Those that call unto good and verbally counsel everyone that they come into contact with, and when they encounter anything reprehensible, they rebuke it with the utmost of their ability. However, they do not maintain contact with the individual that they call. And then the second type is those that call some people into good. They get to know them, befriend and strengthen the ties of brotherhood with them, continually looking out for them with the sole objective of making them into those who assist the call into God through a sound and upright methodology that is in an ever-increasing state of perfection, embracing all of creation. So he unites them upon a single idea and unique perspective. What does that mean? Very simply, is that there's people that will come across in our life that you have one opportunity to meet them. Is that it might be that one passing by. It might be that one interaction at the store. They might be the only Muslim that they see in life, and you know, how can you represent the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ? You know, I had a really paradigm changing experience. One time I was in Sweetwater, Tennessee, and we were on our way to the Seeker's Guidance Retreat that was held in Tennessee. And we end up in this small town, Sweetwater, and we went to Subway to get lunch, and there was these two young girls working, and we were wearing our robes because it was Jummah, and that I got my food and went to sit down, and they asked the brother who was with me, who was also a convert, they said, you know, why is he dressed like that? Like her manager came out and said, why is he dressed like that? He said, you know, we're Muslims, and this is a special day for us, this is Friday. And that at that point I had walked back up, and that he told her that we were Muslims. And this lady was like, y'all are Muslims? Or not the Muslims, the Muslims. And we said, yeah, we're Muslims, yeah. She said, I ain't never seen one of you before. I seen you all on TV, but I ain't never seen one of you before in person, in a very southern accent. And I was like, no, we're Muslims. She said, where y'all from? So I spoke at that point. I was like, I was born, I use the card when I need to. Heartland, Kansas City, Missouri. Can't say this is American as apple pie. And she says that I thought y'all were from over there. And she just kind of points out to the direction like that. I was like, my grandfather's from Kentucky. She said, I thought y'all were from over there. I was gonna pull the Texas card. I was like, my grandmother's from Texas. Now you tell you someone from Texas, Kansas, and Kentucky, no one's gonna doubt you, right? And it wasn't, she said it 3 or 4 times. I thought y'all were from over there. And she said, you know, she didn't really get that. I was like, you know, we converted to this religion. It wasn't really registering with. She said, well, I just want you all to know that you are welcome here in Sweetwater, Tennessee. Ooh, I was like, subhanallah. And this lady has never seen a Muslim before. And that, mashallah, you know, we oftentimes have these preconceived notions of people, and that you oftentimes are very pleasantly surprised that it's the opposite. That's a story, but that's the only interaction we're probably ever going to have with that lady, unless that we actually see her later, and hopefully we'll see her sometime in a mosque and she'd become Muslim and say, I remember you. That actually happened to a friend of ours. I don't know if Abdul Rahman's here. A brother named Omar Daytona, that he went to middle school with an Afghan brother named Mahmoud, and Mahmoud was a bit skinny in middle school. And back in the days when people used to wear starter jackets, he had a starter jacket,
and a bully came up to him and that took his starter jacket. And Omar, at that time, Eugene Daytona, tough Filipino, and that he witnessed this. So this guy walks into the bathroom, and Omar went in, and he said, give that guy his starter jacket back. And he wouldn't. He roughed him up, and he took the starter jacket back and went back and gave it to Mahmoud. And that was the end of it. That years later, long after they graduated from college, in the meantime, Omar had converted, and that, who was Eugene, Mahmoud didn't know. Mahmoud's in a mosque in San Diego, and he sends salams. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Eugene? He recognized him, and it was Eugene, it was Omar. He had converted, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. It might have been because, Allahu A'lam, it might have been because he did that for Mahmoud and stuck up for him without even knowing. That one time Abu Sufyan did something pleasant to Sayyidah Fatima Zahra, and the Prophet ﷺ said, oh Allah, don't forget that for Abu Sufyan. Don't forget that for Abu Sufyan. Abu Sufyan converted. You never know. And that those people that are open in that regard, subhanAllah, when they do good things, that oftentimes it's a means for them. But we have oftentimes that these people that we see at a very short period of time, and then that's it. And what the teachers of science instruct is that our intention is in all of our interactions, is whatever it is that we're doing, whether we're having a plumber come to our house, or whether we're at the store, or whatever it is that we make a conscious intention that to have a meaningful interaction in that person that will inshallah inspire them to accept the truth one day. And that concern should be greater than our concern for whatever it is that we're doing. Now that's hard. It's very easy to forget that, because we interact with people all day long, employees, people that work at gas stations and on and on. But we should remind ourselves of that. We should remind ourselves of that. And that is the prophetic way. And that is the way of the true inheritors of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They're conscious of those meanings. And their consciousness of those meanings stems from their tahakkuk, their actualization, their realization of Iman, Islam, and Ihsan. And that they're witnessing the realities of Liman al-Mulk al-Yawm now, to whom belongs the dominion today. They're witnessing that now. That these are people that they have certainty in the hereafter. They have certainty in the two final abodes. And that embeds in them a very deep mercy that makes them conscious, is that they're required to share this with everyone that is around them. And so making every interaction that we have meaningful, attempting to do that, putting in the spiritual struggle and the mujahada, and you will be surprised, is that if you're conscious of this, and you have your heart is in a state of tawajjuh, where you're turning to Allah, that you're supplicating and turning to Allah, is that interaction will be more meaningful. And that the Prophet ﷺ, even to the extent, what is the secret and why in Ta'if when he was pushed out so vehemently, and he said one of the most famous statements in his entire prophetic legacy, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then that the angels of the mountains came and said that if you permit us, we are going to collapse these mountains on them. What did our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam say? Is that I hope that there will come forth from their loins those who will worship only Allah and not associate any partners to Him. That one of my teachers said that da'wat as-sadiq, yani the da'wah, the calling of a sincere person, that in lam yu'athir fi as-sami' yu'athir man fi sulbih, is that if it doesn't impact the one who's hearing, it might impact those who are they're in their loins. And we should make that intention, that when you are interacting with people, that you are interacting not only with them, but they have possibly progeny in their loins. And you don't know. That maybe you don't impact them, but you impact their loins. Sure enough, the people of Ta'if, that they became Muslim. And that these are meanings. Then we have people that we can establish relationships with. Is that there's people that we keep in contact with. And this is so important. We can't stress this enough. That at this point, this is all we can do. We're coming together once a month, once a year at this point. That we're trying to develop mechanisms where we can nurture these beautiful experiences and interactions that we're all having with one another. The ideal is that we're doing this regularly, that we're meeting regularly, that we have a deep sense of local community, and that we also have meaningful interactions with others on a regular basis, and on a national basis as well. However, that's not always the case, but its follow-up is really, really, really important. Is follow-up, follow-up, follow-up. And that there is this tendency in our communities where people will become Muslim, or they'll be affected positively by something that someone does, and there's a lot of takbirs, but when it really gets down to it, like this person has needs, financial and others, and then no one steps up to the plate. No one steps up to the plate, and that's tragic. Or they only step up to the plate if it's that person fits the mold of someone that they want to step up to the plate and be their poster boy in their community. Otherwise, who would, I'd rather keep my distance. We have to get over that. And that we've been talking about this earlier, and I think we talked about this before, but we were talking about this just before, and I think it's a given that, and unless that we can at least attempt to really have, without sloganizing, a practical solution to many of the social problems in this country, it's very difficult for us to be truly successful here long term, until that we can have the courage to at least hit some of these issues head on and do what we can. I'm not saying that we're going to have the solution for them. There's a lot that we can benefit from, a lot of good work that's already been done, but that should preoccupy our minds, is that keeping in touch, having follow-up is essential. And that's the blessing of things that we learn from, like the blessing of Ramadan. You are going to exert yourself at times that you don't exert yourself. And the momentum that we gain in Ramadan, that if you have a life where you have certain things in order, that you're still reciting Quran, although you're not reciting as much in Ramadan, that you're still praying in Jama'ah, although maybe it's only for Fajr and Isha and not the 5 daily prayers. You're still that have an active life of learning, although it's once a week as opposed to 5 days a week. That's the blessing that the momentum of Ramadan gives you, is that it got the ball rolling. And after a ball's rolling, all you have to do is hit it a few times and it will keep up its speed. It might take a bit more energy to get it rolling, and hakada. And that's what these retreats are supposed to do, is get the ball rolling. And that, in a sense, that it's a band-aid, until that we can have a full-time center where people spend 5 years studying at the feet of the likes of Shaykh Jihad and Maulana Abdul Rahman, and that internalize a good portion of the knowledge that they took from their teachers. They become transformed and they go back to benefit their communities. Which takes us to the next topic that we wanted to leave you all with. And that, real quick, before we do that, actually no, we'll get to that and then we'll get to what I was saying. Is that some have divided, if we look at chapter 5 on page 23, that is titled The Stages, Methods, and Mechanisms of the Individual Call. Is that there are, one way of looking at this is that there's 3 distinct stages of da'wah. And that they're called ta'leef, ta'rif, and taklif. That ta'leef could be roughly translated as endearment, as we have here in the text. That ta'rif roughly translated as elucidation. Taklif roughly translated as responsibility, although it doesn't really convey the essence of what's at hand. That ta'leef, that ulfa is a sense of familiarity. That ta'leef is creating that sense of familiarity. That it's warming people's hearts. And this is the essence of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. لو كنت فظا غليظ القلب لانفض من حولك. That were you to be fadh, and that were you to be coarse and hard-hearted, they would have dispersed from around you. The foundational principle of reaching out to others is one of gentleness, is one of love, and is one of mercy. And that
it was precisely because that the Prophet ﷺ, that when people sat with him, that they came to love him, that they were able to do what they were able to do. Is that the Prophet was here to uplift people. Yes, there are certain individuals where they are so arrogant that you actually have to be stern and arrogant to them to, cower them down from their arrogance. There are people that are like that. But that, unfortunately, there's actually a lot of people like that in our society. They have their own ruling. But in general, that's supposed to be the diversion and not the rule. And that the foundation is that ta'lif, is that there be mulatafa, someone is gentle, someone reaches out, someone does everything that they can to create an amiable feeling between people. And it's not with tasanna, it's not fake, it's real. Someone really wants there to be a positive, long-lasting relationship that develops, and this is the best way to knock on that door and open the door for it. And that after that, this phase takes place, this phase of endearment, and all of the tools that we could get into the details of doing things as simple as smiling. Seriously, if we wanted to have a strong dawah effort, we could just have like Project Smile and just go stand on the street corners and smile. Especially in places like New Jersey and New York. I'm sorry, from the West Coast, man. You guys are rough on this side of the country. Yeah, and just smile. All we need to do is just smile. People, sometimes that's all they need. They'll probably pay us. Like they give musicians money, they'll toss you some, we just walk by and just smile at people, man. That a smile means a lot. For someone who's grumpy or like upset or disillusioned or stressed, a smile actually means a lot. And that was from the sunnah of our Prophet ﷺ. One of his names is Bassam ﷺ, the one who is constantly smiling. And someone that became Muslim said, I didn't once, and this is in the Shama'il, see the Prophet after I became Muslim, except he smiled every single time that he saw me. Allahu Akbar. Wa nafsi fida. What if you would see the Prophet smiling? There's a hadith in Sahih Bukhari that towards the end of the prophetic life, that the Prophet ﷺ, that Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq was leading the prayer, and the hadith is in Bukhari, and the companions were praying behind them, and that the Prophet's chamber where he lived ﷺ used to open up right to the masjid, and there was a curtain, and that they heard the curtain draw, and they knew it was the Messenger of Allah ﷺ. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq started to come back, and he told him to keep his place. And that the narration goes on to stage is that when the Prophet ﷺ that saw the companions in prayer with all of the etiquettes of prayer, facing the Qibla, inwardly and outwardly directing their hearts towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that he smiled. And that when the companions saw that, they were one, happy because the Prophet was ill and they thought he was better, but two, is that after he smiled, is that the narration goes on to say, Kidna in naftatan fi salah. The only way I know how to translate that is that we almost broke our prayer, right? Because that the thing that's interesting to me though is that the Rawi, the one who narrates the hadith, they're supposed to be in prayer. How did he know that the Prophet was smiling? It means they looked. How was you going to know someone's smiling? Right? And why was it that they had so much love for the Prophet ﷺ that they said they almost broke their prayer? They're standing before Allah. This opens up a door that oftentimes is misunderstood, and there's a fine line between the worship of the Prophet ﷺ and between a deep and powerful love that is a means for us to attain the divine love. And because that the companions saw it as such, they didn't separate between the means of the transmission and the transmission itself. As some people want us to believe, that possibly just because of the way that they learned management in the university or something, that the Prophet was like a CEO of a company, came, started up the company and then left. And that's it. It's about the company, and no longer we're going to talk about the CEO. A'udhu billah. No one understood that traditionally, ever. Is that they understood is that
you have a living relationship with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you will continue to have that relationship with Rasulullah in the barzakh, on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and then eternally in paradise. And that it was just really interesting to note that the Sahaba, that, well, even in the books of fiqh, if the Prophet ﷺ, there's a hadith that says this, the Prophet came in and sent salams to one of the companions. He finished his prayer quickly and said, Alaykum as-salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh ya Rasulullah. And the Prophet asked him, why didn't you send salams, return salams in prayer? And generally speaking, according to the Shafi'i school, at least if you use the kafid khitab, if you speak to someone in the second person in your prayer, it invalidates your prayer, except the Messenger of Allah. That were the Messenger of Allah to been, and he says, Assalamu alaikum, it's an obligation to return his salam in prayer. Alaykum as-salam. Other than that, in prayer, what do we say? Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, in the second person. So that we're saying, normally you only say it in the second person if they're right before you, but you're mentioning the Prophet ﷺ in the prayer. What, are you supposed to consciously think about something else and not that? I mean, that doesn't make sense. You're supposed to think about, what did we just learn from Imam Ghazali? That every invocation that you give it is right, and think about that in the prayer. And so that this is amazing. The Prophet smiled, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it was so powerful to them, because they knew what that smile meant. They knew the outward implications, and they knew the metaphysical implications. And they almost broke their prayer because of it. That was the intimacy of the relationship. And you could go on and on and on about the intimacy of the relationship of the companions with Sayyidina Muhammad. But all of that, every single one of these companions went through the stage of ta'lif, where the Prophet, khalas, he took their hearts over. And after having taken their hearts over, that he's the most gentle of people. He'll never burn you. Ever. That oftentimes people are scared to love because they've been burned, and it's horrible to be burned. And so that sometimes the people that have the most capacity for love put these barriers up because they don't want to be burned like they've been burned before. But the beautiful thing is about the Prophet ﷺ is that he'll never burn you. Ever. He'll never let you down. And he will continually coming into hell, even if that's where someone ends up, nasallallahu salam wa afiyah, for anyone who says La ilaha illallah, until he takes everyone out, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He will never, ever, ever let anyone down. That you can give yourself over completely to him and his teachings. And he will be there for you, qat'an, definitively, absolutely, definitely. And that this is a beautiful thing, and likewise his true inheritors, that they have this as much as that could be approximated in relationship to the Prophet ﷺ. This is the first stage, is ta'lif. The second stage is ta'rif, is that of that coming from arafa ya'rifu, which is to know, is that elucidation, teaching people what they need to know. After you develop relationships with people, the next stage is teaching people what they need to know. Is that we have to be serious, that we need knowledge for everything that we do. That after we go through the initial stage that gets our hearts connected, then we got to be serious. Then we have to have commitment. Then we have to learn. Then we have to struggle. And this is the process of people that get back into the deen, people that convert to the deen, people that have been raised in the deen. Is that there's a lot of beautiful perks in the beginning, but then as you reach that point, as I understand that usually people say that most relationships reach at about the 7-year mark, where there's certain challenges that come at that 7-year mark, and if you can get over that, then you are more likely in the long term to have a healthy relationship. And that similarly in your deen, that there's certain things you have to get over, is that you might feel like you're progressing like this, but then it's just flat lines for a long period of time. And you're putting in energy and you don't think you're increasing, but they've done studies that show is that when we progress, it's not like this, that we actually progress like this, like that. And that you think in that moment when it's flatlined, you're putting in that energy, but your heart feels maybe like it did 10 years ago, but you're there, and you think that what's the use of putting in that energy, but you don't realize if you keep doing that, then all of a sudden, you you start perceiving that, and then you'll flatline again, and then هكذا, until eventually that the elective inheritors are exponentially increasing every moment. That's also possible eventually. And that in that moment where it's dull and dry and you feel oftentimes that you're going backwards, you might not necessarily be going backwards. And if you're consistent, you might receive an opening. The second stage is teaching people what they need to know and all of its implications. And unfortunately, time's up. We won't have much more time to go into that stage. And then finally is stage 3, is responsibility, taklif. Kulfa is responsibility. Kulfa, that linguistically is that like a burden. And that kallafa is, in a sense, imposing a burden upon someone. That has a negative connotation though. You're really that teaching people to be responsible at that point. Is that now that once you've been brought in, once you've learned what you need to learn, now you have to get to work to help other people and dedicate your life to that. And that's the greatest thing that you can do, is to help other people. In the end, it's about people. It's not about organizations. It's not about the glittering gold of these nice conferences that everyone is so eager to put on. They have their place, but in the end, it's about people. It's about transformation. It's about hearts. That's in the end what it's about. And if we forget that, and we get our priorities straight such that we're building an institution and that we're doing things that are compromising the people and building institution, what use is that? What use is that? It's very short-sighted, to say the least. Now, if there are costs, and we said this earlier to the brothers that we were just sitting with, a retreat like this has costs involved. If there was a way for us to do this free, that we would have done this for free. Right? If there was a way, if I had enough money to pay for every single one of you to travel here, I would have paid for every single one of you to travel here. That whatever happened to this, what else? I mean, yani, the teachers that I know would never, ever, ever accept money for deen, ever. Right? That is taboo, a'udhu billah. And that if someone has to accept an honorarium because they have bills to pay, it should be like yani, accepting a bag full of excrement that you have to just, do something with. Yani, that this is just something nasty and dirty that, yallah, that's the case. But the ideal is that قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا, say that I ask you for no recompense. That إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ, that we are only feeding you for the sake of God, for the countenance of God. لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا, that we don't want any recompense from you or thanks. And this is why I say to Aisha, when she'd send charity and her servant would take that charity, she would say, listen to the du'as that they make. And she would come back to say to Aisha, and she would tell her, and she would make those same du'as, and a du'a is for a du'a, and she wants her ajr from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The teacher of Sayyid Habib Muhammad bin Abdullah Haddar is that he felt uncomfortable even when people used to tell him Jazakallah khair, which they're supposed to tell him Jazakallah khair. But he didn't want that to be his recompense for what he did. There's ilm ladunni and there's ajr ladunni. There's knowledge that comes directly from the presence of God, and there's reward that comes directly from the presence of God. And that's the type of reward that we want. We want our recompense solely from the sake of Allah Ta'ala. And if someone has to charge to get it by, it's one of those necessary evils, if there even is such a thing. But, the intention should remain. Even charging to build for the next year, that's when it really starts to get questionable. Because to what degree do you charge then? And so forth. And in the end, that the foundation is that this thing should be for free. And that it's difficult, yes, with all the breakdowns of what we've been hearing and the endowments in places like the United States where there was never endowments to begin with, it's a challenge. But since when has our creativity become so stifled? We have so many smart people. Why can't we think of an alternative model? Let's get some smart people to think of an alternative economic model for our nonprofits, so they don't have to send you an email that 5 times a month about money. which in the end, that kills the whole spirit that is related to that institution. That, like, you know, again, we have to do it, you have to do it, but in the end, let's be creative and think of ways around that. Maybe there's a way around it. Maybe that we have to have 10-year growth as opposed to 3-year growth to get around it. To me, that's worth it. But these are just ideas, and they're going to just go off, and who knows if we'll follow up on them. But the point is, like, let's look into it at least. Right? That's not my specialty. That's what I was going to do before I became Muslim, is economics. But right, I became Muslim and went to the desert. And I don't know much about economics, but there's a lot of people that do. So let's look into this. The final stage is taklif, is where after that people feel responsible now to help other people. Is that our people here, we should feel a responsibility, as we already said, is that we have to see the American people. These are our people. Anyone who is here, these are our people. And we have to have, there's a responsibility upon our shoulders to see them as our people, and to serve our people, and to help our people, and to deal with the problems of our people, and to uplift our people, and to teach our people, and all of these other meanings that relate to this responsibility. These are the 3 different stages that, again, these are sunan. The book that I quoted earlier, The 5 Levels of Leadership, which is an interesting book, there's benefit in it, that the 5 levels of leadership are essentially these 3 stages that I just mentioned to you. That it's pretty much the same thing, just with a little bit more nuance. But these are the 3 stages: ta'lif, ta'rif, and then after that, taklif. He closes his treatise with some of the traits, which we're going to just read through these real quick before we turn it over to Sheikh Muhammad. And I again, Sayyidi, apologize for taking your time. That he says here, the foundation of these traits is a righteous, insincere intention for the sake of God, the generous. وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. We all should just strive to be sincere. Divorce people from why you do things. Divorce these thoughts that come to your heart that of wanting to be famous, of wanting people to praise you, of wanting to attain acclaim and awards and all this other type of stuff. And you hear people even talk about this, that we want Muslims to win the Nobel Prize. I don't give a damn if Muslims win the Nobel Prize or not, right? We want you to be sincere, right? It doesn't matter if Allah accepts your act. That's infinitely better than any Nobel Prize that you could possibly win. Now, if a Muslim's sincere and happens to win the Nobel Prize, great, right? But this is what we want. We want sincerity, and you have to strive to attain that. It's a active process that we go through of sifting through the negative thoughts that come to our heart time and time again, in wanting to choose the choice aspect of those, which is only doing things because we want to draw near to Allah. That secondly, sidq, truthfulness, which is slightly different, which is directing both your inward and outward state, all of your energy to Allah Ta'ala. 3, to become immersed in the intention of the beloved Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the perfected beings and the heirs from amongst the truthful men of the call unto God. 4, to sense the joy of the beloved Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam with the call of members of his community. 5, compassion and mercy with those that you are speaking to. 6, love for the recipient for God's sake. We should love all of God's creations. That is not some goofy, Sufi, California stuff. Is that you love everything in Allah's creation because Allah created it. From that standpoint, that's haqq, and that's true. Secondly, that you give it a judgment based upon the sacred law of whatever that thing is. So you hate the disbelief of the disbeliever, not the essence of the disbeliever unless they die upon that. That you hate the disobedience of the disobedient person, and if they change it, all of a sudden you love them. It's different. It's a subtle difference. And the difference is that makes all the difference in the world, because then that's opening up a side in your heart to have love and mercy for them, which are prerequisites really for them truly responding to whatever it is that you're trying to present to them. 7, supplication and in returning unto God on behalf of the recipient. That we should be turning, if someone asks you to pray for them, or that someone, we've seen this time and time again, if you turn to Allah oftentimes, wow, that you see that results immediately at times from the blessing of turning to Allah Ta'ala. 8, to avoid seeing oneself as better than them, as affairs are in accordance with their final outcome. The worst possible kafir that you can imagine. That if you are reaching out to that person, you cannot think for one moment that you're better than them. It is totally haram in Sharia to do that. You are committing one of a major wrong action by doing that, no matter what their state. That for the caller to hold certain that the fruits that manifest the result of his call and actions are in reality due to divine will, providence, and the blessing of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, not of anything that they do. If people start responding to your talks and your lectures in your service or whatever it is that you're doing, is that you say that you don't notice that as being from anything that you've done. 10, that he never bears a grudge in his heart against anyone who harms or abuses him. Rather, he prays for him to be guided. 11, that he never believes, never mind relies upon any words of praise towards him. If people praise you, what Imam Haddad used to say is that if there's something good in you, he used to deflect it to the ocean of the Prophet ﷺ, because he ﷺ gathered all traits of goodness. And if someone is praising something in you, they're praising something ultimately in the Prophet ﷺ, and that we did nothing to attain that. That 12, to discipline the self from desiring a place in the hearts of people, and that one's words affect them, and from believing that it is only right that one's words are listened attentively to, or benefit is drawn from them, such that they follow him, or they are under his command at his beck and call. 13, that the caller is not averse to receiving advice or listening to the admonition of other callers, even if they are lesser than him in the apparent sense, as the sincere caller never perceives anybody to be lesser than him. The Prophet ﷺ said, the wise word is the lost property of the believer wherever he finds it, and it is his by right. 14, to not take into consideration that which people possess from the world. God exalted be, he says, don't stretch your eyes to what we have bestowed on some classes of them, and do not be sad over them, but lower your wing to the believers. 15, to never despair, regardless of the obstinacy that's shown by the recipient. Just arrogant refusal to accept the call. And that's an abrupt ending. I think something's missing. But that's all we have. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that bless us with this reality, inshaAllah ta'ala. In summation, is that Imam Zayd has mentioned this publicly, and he's actually mentioned it in a paper publicly, so we'll share this with you. And this is Imam Zayd. And I have a unique relationship to this statement, because that before I came back to California in 2005, that there was a summer program there, and someone came from Syria, and he told me about a gathering that he was in with Sheikh Mustafa Turkmani, and Imam Zayd was there, and they were reading a book titled Rafraf al-Inaya of Imam al-Rawas, and that Sheikh Mustafa ended up giving this book to Imam Zayd and sharing this part of this book, that in it Imam al-Rawas had a vision, and that Imam Zayd translated the vision. I'm just summarizing the essence of it, and essentially that it went something along the lines that Imam al-Rawas, who lived about 200 years ago, something like that he had a vision that the Western powers were going to grow very strong. And keep in mind, America did not become the dominant country in the world until after World War II. So this is a long time ago. That the Western powers were going to become very strong and powerful, and that they were going to show great enmity towards Islam and be oppressing Muslims. He says, and then that in his dream that he saw what he called something along the lines of like a prophetic breeze through. And then he said that he noticed large contingents of Westerners that becoming Muslim, that in hordes. And I remember Dr. Omar told me, after doing khalwa in Medina Munawwara in Ramadan for a long period of time, that he had a vision of hordes of husky white Nebraskans that making tawaf around the Kaaba. And that then when I first got back, the second day that I got back from that I arrived, that I accompanied Imam Zayd, that we were going to the MCA mosque in Santa Clara. He's living in the khutbah, and we were talking about something, and that something along these lines, and then he said, and there's a story that, and then he stopped. And for some reason I knew what he was going to tell me. I was like, are you going to tell me the story that Sheikh Mustafa told you from Because the person that I just literally days before heard this, and that I had a sense that that's what he was going to tell me. Then he said he didn't really want to tell me. And then that I knew it was a story. I said, you mean that story? And then he said, yes. And so then he recounted me the same story. And that, you know, these are visions. This isn't, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But it makes sense. It makes sense. And that even if you just look at, you know, what's happening, I force myself to remain optimistic. As dismal as things seem, that Allah is qadir ala kulli shay. Allah is qadir ala kulli shay. And this is His religion. هُوَ الَّذِي أَرْسَلَ رَسُولَهُ بِالْهُدَى وَدِينِ الْحَقِّ لِيُظْهِرُ عَلَى الدِّينِ كُلِّهِ. He is the one who sent His Prophet with guidance in the religion of truth in order that he may manifest it over all the religions. One of the most oft recited hadith that I heard from my teachers is the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, زُوِيَتِ الْأَرْضِ مَشَارِكَهَا وَمَغَارِبَهَا. The earth has been folded up for me from east to west, and indeed this deen of mine will reach that which was folded up for me by the one whose hand Muhammad's soul is. There will remain no house made out of fur, mud brick, rock, or hair, any type of dwelling, except that my religion will enter into it. Bi-izzi aziz, O dhilli dhalil. As for the verse, if you look what the commentators say, they say this will happen at the end of time when Sayyidina Isa bin Maryam comes. I'm not saying that that's in our time, but that will happen at the end of time. And that there also is historical precedence to that as well, as that Muslims did, for the most part, that rule the world in a sense that for about 8 centuries. And that the point of all of that is that the greatest thing that we can do is to develop a deep, profound, loving connection with the Prophet ﷺ. There's nothing more important that we could do in this regard. And perhaps that when a critical mass of people tap into that, and there's a concerted effort, and people are really doing that 80% and weeping and saying Ya Allah before Fajr and intending that and doing this time and time and time again, that, you know, hopefully that we will live to see that tipping point, inshallah ta'ala, where many people that experience that great beauty. Jazakumullah khair. Again, apologize for going over. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.